Hello, everybody. How are you? And who am I? Well, you know who I am. Who knows? Maybe my guest might be offended by this, but I think I have seniority, so I think I can say it. I am your favorite English teacher, but who knows? If this guest is your favorite English teacher, I won't take offense. It's okay. I'll let it go this time. And yes, we're doing an interview today, and I have a special guest from Madrid, Spain. But he's not from Madrid, Spain. Well, we're going to find out all the information in today's interview, but I believe he's American and he's living in Madrid, Spain at the moment. We have Dave El Profe Guiri. Now, did I say it correct, Dave? Is it Guiri?
So
Or
this is a
Guiri?
this is a very Spanish word, Guiri,
Okay. Uh-huh.
at
Like
least Spanish
Guiri.
slang. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Maybe let's start with that. So, what is Guiri?
So Guiri means basically a foreigner,
Oh,
and
really?
usually
Okay.
usually from either an English speaking country or from the rest of Europe. So
Okay.
so I'm a Guiri. You would be a Guiri.
Okay.
It's like think about like gringo for South America.
Yeah.
They use that for only Americans, right? Or
Well,
well, American. Well,
I'm trying to
okay,
change
go.
it right now because yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about my story. Is that well, for me, I'm gonna find out about this in this interview. But I'm Canadian, but for me, like the American Canadian culture is very similar. Of course, there are differences. Maybe we could talk about that later. But so I always say I'm gringo because yeah, when I'm in Latin America and I say I'm Canadian, like, oh, some well most people know Canada's a different country, but sometimes they don't know it's a different country. And then they look at me and say, "Oh, you're gringo." I'm like, "Okay, I'm gringo." Because like Latinos got Latino. So I want like a term for Canadians and Americans. I don't like to say Canada and the United States. Canada and the United States. It's a lot of syllables. So I prefer just to say gringo. So many people say gringo is just American, but for me, I'm trying to change it. I have a propaganda campaign every day. I'm trying to change it so that I can be gringo along with my American brothers.
To be honest, before you even said that, I thought that Canadians were included in the gringo term under the gringo umbrella.
Well, it kind of depends on the country because if it's like the further south you go in South America, the more gringo is like any foreigner. Like for example, Brazil, gringo is basically anybody who's not from Brazil. But yeah, you go to Mexico, for Mexicans, gringo is just American. Colombia, it's kind of a mixture, it seems like at the moment, where some people say it's just Americans, other people say it's could be Canadians or Americans. Some people like Brazilians, it's any foreigners. So and it's that's why I want to claim it. I'm trying to claim it for Canadians and Americans. I want to be part of the gringo community. So
I support you in that. I support
okay.
you. Tell me where to vote, and I'll be
Yeah,
there.
I'm gonna make some sort of petition. Yes, gonna get signatures from everybody. Yes, I think many Latinos will be against it, but Latinos, I want my own term for my people. All right, well, let's not get too sidetracked now. So, anyways, okay, so Guiri is foreigner. You're at Profe Guiri. Now it all makes sense. The pronunciation is Guiri as well, not Guiri. Okay, good. Well, Dave, quickly give an introduction to yourself for people who don't know who you are. I'm pretty sure my followers may not know who you are, and maybe your followers. I looked at your Instagram page and you're a little bit mysterious. I'm not gonna lie. Like, no stories. And the videos you have are just straight to the point, the information. I think the only thing I found out about you from your Instagram posts was that you seem to like to do sports, but I'm not too sure which sports. But yeah, so who are you and what should the people know about Dave?
Yeah. So I'm Dave El Profe Guiri. I'm from. I always say Boston to make it easier for people. The capital of Massachusetts in the U.S., but I'm from maybe 35 minutes away in a decent sized town. And I moved to Spain in 2014. And I've been teaching English here ever since. And I mean, there's a lot that's kind of a very general overview. And right now I'm teaching English online mostly. I only started with Instagram with El Profe Guiri maybe a year ago, or maybe a little over a year ago. And I like to kind of put a little humor. Like I like your sense of humor. I appreciate it, and I also appreciate another English speaker that speaks Spanish, right? Because I don't know. Do you know many people where you're from that actually speak Spanish?
Yeah. Yeah, so from where I'm from, well, like, yeah, I'm from the middle of nowhere in Canada. So I know exactly how you feel when people ask you where you're from. Even though I think in my case, I'm gonna say it's even worse for me because most
Yeah, it's
people when
up.
they think about Canada, they think Toronto. It's always Toronto. Oh, like with Latinos at least, it's always like, oh, you're from Canada. So do you live in Toronto? It's like, no, I don't live in Toronto. So I'm from Western Canada. They're like, oh, where? And like, Alberta. Oh, what's the city? I'm not from a city. I'm from you're from a town. I'm from a farm, more or less. I had to drive
How
15
many
minutes.
cities? How many cities does Alberta have though?
It's two
Like
cities.
major. Two.
Well, yeah,
Wow.
big cities. Yeah, big cities. Because I remember when I was younger, I would go to a Swedish language camp in the United States, and it seems like for Americans, a city has to be like I don't know, 100,000 people, and below that, you guys start saying it's just a town, because the closest city, like according to the Canadian government or the provincial government, I think is like maybe like 50,000 people or 30,000 people. And when I would tell people that, oh, the closest city was a place called Cold Lake and there's like 30,000 people, the Americans would say, well, it's not a city, that's a town. So I kind of already knew that, but it's called for us, it's a city, but yeah, I guess for you guys, it's a town. But yeah, the two major cities are Calgary and Edmonton in my province. So yeah, they have about 1 million people each. So yeah, small cities in the States, I think. But yeah, most people in Latin America, I'm pretty sure Spain would probably be the same deal. Don't really know where uh, my provinces or the towns are or the cities are. So I just say, from Western Canada. Yeah, don't think too much about it. I'm from Canada. That's all you need to know for the moment.
Yeah. You said you went to a Swedish language school in the US. What?
Yes. Yeah. So actually, it's a really interesting program. If somebody wants to look this up at the moment, I guess if you're a Latino parent and you want to send your kids to learn Spanish in the summer, they in Minnesota they have these language camps which last for 1 month. Uh, it's called Lake Bemidji, and the college I believe is Concordia College. It's famous in Minnesota, and yeah, they have Spanish, they have German, they have Norwegian, they have Swedish, they have Russian, they have Polish, they have most of the major languages, and they have these month-long language camps where basically the kids, well, you know the gringo summer camps, right? So basically the kids get sent, parents get a break, and the kids just have fun for a month. But in this case, they're learning language and doing activities. So I did that for 4 years when I was younger, and I was the only Canadian there. I found out about it by chance, and my family is Swedish, so they pushed me. Like, well, not they. I wanted to do it, but they're like, "Oh yeah, we support you. Yeah, go do it." But I was the only Canadian there, so I think I realized my Canadian identity when I went to that camp for the first time, and all the Americans were like, "Say about, yeah, say about again, yeah, say it again, say it again." Oh, you just said A. You just said A, just like in South, yeah, just like in South Park, you said A. So yeah, it was a fun camp, but I did that for 4 years. That's when I started to learn Swedish. And then later on, when I went to university, I got fluent in Swedish. Yeah, that's the first language I learned. Sometimes it surprises people. Swedish isn't a very common language that people learn. But yeah, thanks to that language camp, I was able to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting though. Like as a choice, just it wouldn't be a language I would guess that you just go for, especially
Mhm.
at a younger age too.
Yeah, I was a bit of a weird kid. I'm not too sure if you're a weird kid, Dave, but I was a bit of a weird kid. And
We're all
for whatever
weird.
reason, yeah, I guess we're all weird. Yeah. But I knew when I was like 8 years old, I realized I was Swedish. It was a homework assignment in school. The teacher said, "Okay, I want you guys to go home, and I want you guys to ask your parents where your ancestors are from." I was like, "Okay, cool." At, at that, you're a young kid, you don't really realize that people come from, well, your ancestors come from different places. So I asked my parents, so, Mom, Dad, so where are our ancestors from? And of course, lots of Americans, Canadians are a mixture of a whole bunch of things, but my parents just said, yeah, mostly Swedish. It's like, Swedish? What's Swedish? And I started researching about it as a young kid, and I just became a little bit obsessed with being Swedish. Like, I'm Swedish Canadian, I'm Swedish. And yeah, so I wanted to learn Swedish, connect with my roots, and that's what I did. So when people ask me why I learned Swedish, it's not for business reasons, not for any smart reason, just because I wanted to connect with my roots. I wanted to be more Viking. Yeah.
I can identify with that actually. So my family, my dad is Portuguese. He was
Okay.
born in Portugal but moved to the US at a young age. So
Hmm.
he's more American than he is Portuguese, and his Portuguese nowadays sounds like it's very weird. He speaks with a native accent, but
Hmm.
he says things that you would think they're like direct translations from English basically.
Hmm. Oh, so he's like
And so
speaking what is it called? Like Portuguese? They
yeah,
say
something
Spanglish. I don't know what the mixture between Portuguese and English is, but okay. Yeah, but it's like
exactly that.
a bastard form of Portuguese, more or less. All right.
Yeah.
So your father's Portuguese then, and your mother, is she 100% American revolutionary?
She's Irish,
She's
but I
Irish.
mean, I think that side of the family, I mean, they were there for 4 generations before me, so it's American.
Mhm.
But yeah, but my dad never taught me Portuguese. I had to. That was my kind of. I needed to reconnect, so I learned on my own. But
Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
Wait, so because I know you're living in Spain right now, but yeah, did you learn Portuguese? Was that like the first language that you learned, or did you learn Spanish first?
it's weird. It's a weird story because I didn't learn Portuguese until after I learned Spanish. Really,
Mhm.
um, it was because I think so. My whole language journey started with when my grandfather died because
Yeah.
I never spoke. It was such a weird situation. I never had a conversation with my grandparents, and
Hmm.
I was talk like with my brothers about this. How weird of a situation it was. My parents would leave us at their house. We'd sit down on the couch. My grandfather would be watching football. We'd, of course, I say football now, but soccer,
Okay.
right?
Okay. Soccer. Yeah. I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so we had no idea what was going on, and then we waited for him to like fall asleep, and then we wouldn't talk to him though. It was
Yeah.
very weird. So when he passed away, I had this feeling of like I missed out on a lot, and
Yeah.
I just kind of had that with me when I was a kid. And then I didn't really like. I never. I didn't start learning Portuguese as a result of it right after, but I always had that feeling of a lack of connection. And then I traveled to Portugal with my dad when I was younger and had an amazing time. And just as a kid, seeing um, you know, really old castles and old structures that you don't find in the US or in Canada
Yeah. Yeah.
like that. And I had a great time. I really loved it. Then a couple years passed. Eventually I mean I started learning Spanish in school. Like I'm sure it's similar in Canada that you're obligated to learn some language at some point, right?
Yeah. So no, yeah. So again, I'm from a really small town. So
Okay.
of course, public schools in Canada are pretty good. They're decent public schools, but our town was so small. There's only 10,000 people in my town. So they're actually, my part of Alberta has a really large French community. So you can learn French, but there's a separate French school. So it's like a French immersion school. So what happened was basically the kids of the French people, they would all go to the French school. And then the English Canadians, they would go to the English school. And there was never really any mixture. There wasn't really a rivalry, but we never, yeah, it's just weird. You just never mixed. It's like segregation. You never really talked to the French kids, even though they seemed to be good people. But yeah, so in high school, I think maybe in the province it was an obligation. I don't like that word in English, obligatory. No, I think I said it right. Even for me, sometimes I say mispronounce things. Uh, but yeah, in my high school, there was no language classes. I don't think they could find teachers for it. So the only reason I learned Swedish was because I
Yeah.
wanted to. But all my other classmates, yeah, they never learned any other languages. Like in my town, I'm pretty sure I'm one of the few people that learned a second language. Everybody either speaks French or English. Well, the Frenchies do speak English, but yeah, they speak with a very heavy French accent. You always know that they're French because they have the heavy French accent. But yeah, so most of Canada, yeah, you have to learn a second language. I agree with that. But in my case, I was a little bit special because yeah, I went to a high school that was too small to have any language classes.
Yeah, that must have been difficult too, just like seeking it out too. If you didn't have the resources in school to learn Swedish, then to go off on your own
Mm,
and
yeah.
figure it
Well,
out.
yeah, because like when we, well, I don't know, how old are you? I think we're about the same age, aren't we?
31.
Okay, yeah, I'm just like 1 year older, so I'm 32. Yeah. So when we were growing up, of course, well, you're from a more developed part of Gringo land, yeah, I could say. But yeah, where I'm from, just the middle of nowhere, the boonies of Canada. Yeah, when I was growing up, like there's no Amazon, so it was very difficult to find resources, and the internet was just starting to explode. So yeah, I was able to find some things online, but yeah, it was difficult to find anything to help me learn. Yeah, to learn Swedish. So yeah, kind of a drawback to living in the middle of nowhere is that yeah, you're a little bit isolated from the rest of the world. I definitely felt it. Like when I was growing up, I didn't really notice that I was isolated, but then of course I went to the language camp and then I started traveling a little bit and I just realized, oh, you're from the middle of nowhere. And oh, it's really cold compared to everywhere else, even in North America. It's an extremely cold place. So yeah, you realized a lot of things. So it was difficult, but it's much easier nowadays. Like I wish I could be like 15 years old now, even though I know those like Generation Z, the Zoomers, they have their own problems, but still, like learning Swedish now would be so much easier with all the resources there are online, and even learning other languages. Yeah, it'd be so much easier, so much easier.
Yeah, and that's a lesson for anybody who's listening who is learning English, right? Like
Mhm.
you have it much better than
Mhm.
than
Yeah,
20 years ago.
yeah.
You
If
have
you're if you're
so
if you're
many
a young
resources.
person, oh yeah, if you're a young person nowadays, like even just, I don't think Netflix is going to teach you English to fluency. You're going to need other help, but still, like you have Netflix where you can watch any major TV show. It's so easy to learn English nowadays. Sometimes when people complain, it's okay. Yeah, I know it's not easy, but still, there's really no excuses not to learn another language. It's so easy for Americans, Canadians, Latinos, Spanish people. It's really not that hard. You have all the resources you need to do it.
Yeah, it's just that willpower, wanting to putting the time in, just like anything
Mhm.
else.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to talk about a lot of things with you, but so let's go back to learning Spanish because that's what we were talking about. So, uh,
Yeah,
what is what? Yeah, let's start with that. When did you start learning Spanish? Was it? Yeah, so it sounds like it was obligatory. Obligatory. Obligatory.
I
Uh,
had to.
you had to do it in high school, or it did start even earlier than that, like elementary school or middle school.
It started in middle school, and I chose it because it was in the beginning there were two choices, French or Spanish.
Okay.
And for me, I was like, I don't know, Spanish, it sounded easier to me.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
and throughout, middle school, I did what I had to do to pass, and I never liked it. I never actually learned how to use it. It was just basically to take tests, right? To pass
Mm,
tests that you needed to pass, and you know things like that. And the same with high school. Just basically learning grammar and memorizing vocabulary, and to be honest, in the end, it did form this kind of structure in my head of Spanish, but I didn't really learn it at that point. It was if somebody came up to me speaking Spanish, I would not know what was going on, and I wouldn't know how to express myself. Um, and it wasn't until college um, that so my I started studying criminal justice in college. I wanted to be a cop,
I actually, I'm not gonna
and
lie. Like when I look at your face, I think, "Man, like this, I can imagine this guy being a cop. Like I imagine you in uniform, just walking down the street. Yeah, you look like a cop. Yeah. Oh,
maybe it's never
hopefully
too
that's
late.
not a hopefully that's not an insult. Like, I think you'd be like one of those handsome cops in the calendars, like doing the selling, like doing the poses and then selling selling them for charity. Yeah, I think you'd be a good traditional cop. Actually, when I talk to Latinas, they always say, because funny in Latin America, the cops are usually pretty ugly men, and they'll move to the United States and they'll see all these like firemen and police calendars, and they'll say, "Oh, the cops here in the United States are just they're so dreamy." So yeah. I think you would have been a good cop, Dave. All right, so okay, you were studying criminal justice.
Yeah. So after, as part of the curriculum of the the program, I needed to take, I think it was like at least, there was like a minimum of language courses that I needed to take. And it was my second year that I had to take my first one. And I went in to take a level test so that they could figure out where to place me. And I did pretty well, and I guess, but to be honest, I don't understand how, because I really hadn't spoken Spanish in a couple of years, right? So it didn't really make sense to me. They said, yeah, maybe you could go into like an intermediate level course. And I said, no, I just want to do the bare minimum and get through this.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, I did, not because of the level, but because I met the professor that changed my life.
Okay.
His name was Jose Miana, and he had Spanish family from the north of Spain. He was this man. I'm sitting down right now. He's probably about this tall.
Was a short guy.
Very short,
okay.
Tiny guy that came into work every day with a suit and tie. And he was just like the best person, like so nice. And he didn't care about, and this was a selling point too, he didn't care about grades. He didn't care about tests or anything like that. He just wanted to talk about Spain, talk about all of his experiences in Spain and why it's so cool. And he would invite us over his house and he would cook for us. It was amazing. It was awesome. And as a result, I just kind of, I don't know why, but it kind of reconnected me with that feeling that I had when my grandfather died, because Spain and Portugal, they're very similar in terms of culture and of course history, right? So yeah, I kind of reconnected, and then I just dove in head first, and I just studied and started researching language learning, following all the polyglots online to figure out the best ways to learn, and just became obsessed with it. And then I ended up studying in Salamanca, which is like a university.
I've heard about that city, but which part of Spain is it? Like, is it central Spain, northern Spain, southern Spain?
Yeah, central western. So okay. Madrid is right dead in the center, and then Salamanca is closer to the border of Portugal. Okay. Yeah. It's about 2.5 hours.
I don't think there's not a lot of people there, right? I think there's not a lot of people. It's kind of isolated, but it's very beautiful. I think I've heard it's a very beautiful part. Well, I think all of Spain is very beautiful from what I've heard, but I've heard that's like isolated but very beautiful, cheap living as well compared to the other parts of Spain.
Yeah. It's centered. The city's centered around the university, which is the oldest university in Spain, and they brag about Christopher Columbus having passed through the university, and other figures. And Salamanca, there's I don't know if you've ever heard of El Lazarillo de Tormes, which is like a really old text in Spanish.
Okay.
And El Tormes is the river that kind of goes through Salamanca. And so this person was born in the river, and there are like scenes that happen in the city. And so after starting to study Spanish, I started taking courses of like literature and things like that. And, it's really cool when you have that experience, when you read about something and then you go there and then you see something that was present in that story, especially when it's something that was written hundreds of years ago. And it was an amazing experience. I was only able to study there for a month.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because I'm a wrestler. That's the sport.
Okay, we found the sport that Dave does. Okay, so but you were there on exchange for a competition, or you were there studying, and because you're a wrestler, like you had to go back home to keep on competing? How did that work?
So the problem is that I couldn't take a complete semester, because wrestling season it's both in the fall semester and the spring semester. So I couldn't take the semester off just to go out and study, even though in the end, whatever, it wouldn't have been a big deal, but I didn't want to. So I ended up doing that. And after I came back, So it was like in June of 2013. After I came back, I decided that I'm switching my major from criminal justice to Spanish. I could have double majored, but um, but there were like three. I had to take. I would have had to make my last semester a nightmare, so I ended up minoring in CJ and um and yeah, majoring in Spanish.
Spanish language. Well, yeah, like Spanish language or Spanish literature. What was the
So
major?
it's just the in the Spanish language. It's a
Spanish language.
general,
Okay.
yeah, but so you could have different focuses depending on what you wanted to go into. And I focus a little bit more on literature.
Yeah. Well, I studied political science, and I always tell people that, like, definitely, the reason I'm here today is because of studying political science. But at the same time, I always tell people it was I wasted a lot of money studying something that didn't really give me a job. So of course, as soon as I hear like your major is Spanish language, similar to my own situation, I would probably say, well, political science, like I could have just read a whole bunch of books about politics and pretty much it was the same thing. The only thing I really learned from political science was how to write an essay really well. I'm pretty good at writing now because of university, but besides that, most of it I could have just done by myself at home. Do you feel the same way about Spanish? Like, are you really happy that you have the major in Spanish, or do you kind of say to yourself, well, I'm here today because of it, but at the same time, I could have done all of this work for free, just being at home, reading Spanish literature and being interested in the language?
Yeah. So like you said, hindsight is 2020, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And when you're making these decisions when you're very young, you don't
Especially when you,
understand the
well, I'm not
world.
too sure. Like your family, did they go to university, or were you one of like the first ones in your family to do it?
Yeah, both my parents went.
Okay. Like, yeah, my kids, like, no, but I was the first one in my family to go to university. So I was just, yeah, just making decisions on the fly. Like, I think I'm doing this right. I think I'm doing this right. I think it's a good decision. But yeah, like, especially when you're young, I always tell my videos, I make videos for like Latinas about dealing with gringo men. And I always say, men in general, but yeah, gringo men, if you want to make a generalization, like before 25 years old, we're pretty stupid. We're pretty stupid guys. We make a lot of dumb decisions. So yeah, don't take gringo men under 25 years old too seriously, because when I was 20, like under 25 years old, I was making a whole bunch of not horrible decisions. Luckily, I didn't do anything too stupid, but still, there's a whole bunch of things, hindsight 2020, where I say, I probably should have taken a different course. But yeah, so yeah, you did the best based on what you knew. So yeah, if you could go back, would you still have done everything, or would you have done things a little bit differently?
Um, no, I wouldn't do anything differently. So yeah, going back to that idea of, so for me, it's not just about the degree, right?
Okay.
The whole experience that I had at college, yeah, it's priceless, right? So it's what had not only the classes, right, not only what I learned on the academic side of things, but also how I grew as a person, the people I met, the experiences that I had. It was worth it in the end, even though student loans hurt. They're painful, man.
I finished paying mine like a year ago. Did you finish paying yours, or you still
No,
have
not
some?
yet. Still
Not
got
yet.
them.
Okay,
Still got
yeah,
them.
still got.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, yeah. Well, Canada's a little bit cheaper, so I know for Americans, I always feel, ooh, that's got to hurt with the American student loans. Yes.
Yeah, man, it hurts. But in the end, yeah, I mean, it brought me to where I am today. It made me who I am today. So it was worth it in the end.
And I had a similar situation learning Spanish. I never took Spanish in high school, but I started taking Spanish in university. But I was taking Spanish and French because I studied political science. And in Canada, if you want to get into politics, you have to speak both languages. So that was my plan. I'm going to study political science. I'm going to have a future in politics in Canada. I'm going to speak French. But yeah, the French teachers in university, they never inspired me. They were, well, I'm I'm not too sure, but the gringo stereotype of French people is that they're dickheads. Well, maybe not in the United States, but in Canada, the English-speaking Canadians, we always say the French people are dickheads. They're cocky. They think that they're the hot shit in the world. And yeah, the professors, they always kind of gave me that feeling too. And even the students, there were students that were studying French and they're really good at it. And I always felt like they had this attitude of, well, I am better than everybody else because I speak French. Me being like a farm kid from Canada, I don't really like stuck up people. So I was taking French classes, and the teachers seemed stuck up, the students seemed stuck up. So I really didn't enjoy it. So I took more semesters of French than I did Spanish, but I cannot speak any French. I did not enjoy the classes at all. They focused a lot, even more than other language courses, on grammar. So it's just always like plus perfecto. This is really, really boring. But yeah, then I had a similar experience to you where my first semester of Spanish, my girlfriend at the time was Mexican. So I decided, okay, for my extracurricular, I'm going to take Spanish because I have my girlfriend Mexican. And yeah, may as well start learning Spanish and get my credits for my degree. So my first semester, my professor's name was Jose Lara, and he's from Mexico. Yeah, short guy as well. It's funny. He said, yeah, it's a short guy, and just incredibly nice. Of course, I didn't spend all the time talking about Mexico, but because I had my Mexican girlfriend, every once in a while we would talk about Mexico, and in classes he would talk about Mexican culture, and for me, yeah, that really inspired me because the reason I learned Swedish was because of the culture and the history, and the reason I got good at Spanish was just the teachers. They would start telling me about the different dialects, the differences between the different Latin American cultures. And it was very fascinating to me. Like the reason I learn language is because I want to connect with the culture, not because I want to show off to somebody or I want to speak perfect French, Swedish, Spanish. Of course, I want to speak better Spanish, but like the main reason is to connect with people. And with those professors, I had a professor from Mexico, a professor from Brazil, a professor from Spain, and yeah, just helped me connect with the culture. And like I took French also a little bit in elementary school, and again, I hated it. Just the teachers didn't do anything to help me connect with the culture. Just it wasn't interesting. And yeah, it seems like it was similar to you, where it didn't really click for you. You didn't really get inspired until you found somebody who showed you the cultural differences and the way things are done in Spain. Yeah, and would you say that's the main reason that the Spanish that you learned in high school, like it never really attracted you, was just because, yeah, they focused too much on like the language and not enough on talking about the cultures, or was it just because you were young? And yeah, when you're young, yeah, you just don't really care that much about anything else.
Yeah, I think when somebody in these kind of stories are super common in the language learning community, right? That
Yeah.
I think the key is like once the language crosses the door of the classroom, that's when you see people who actually learn. Because when I was in school, I had no interest in other countries. I cared about the kids around me, and if I don't want them to laugh at me, I don't want them to think I'm weird. That kind of social,
That peer pressure, right? This peer pressure just kind of,
yeah,
stay to the status quo.
exactly. Fly under the radar, right? And it's so I just never had a connection with it, and it never felt like it existed outside of the classroom. And then for some reason, and literally it existed out of the classroom at college, because our professor would go and cook us dinner at his house, and he would make us speak Spanish in his house. So like it's creating a connection with real people, with real having real experiences. And yeah, so and it's interesting, most people in the US would learn, I hate when people say about Latin American Spanish because there's so many.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But Latin American Spanish or Mexican Spanish, and most of my teachers taught that when I was in school. And so when I was starting to try to learn Spanish from Spain, I felt a little bit ridiculous in the beginning doing the gracias, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But in the end, I got over it, and it just took being around Spanish people to not care about it anymore, right? Because if everybody's doing it, nobody's gonna say anything to me.
Well, right now in the United States, there's a huge Latin American community. So when you were in university, because you said like meeting other Spanish people. So did you meet Spanish people or I don't know, Latin Americans in university, or like it wasn't like you learned Spanish pretty well in university, but it wasn't until you went to Spain that you really started to connect with the language?
Um, so most of my classmates, I had some classmates that were native speakers, but they were from mostly from Mexico.
Mhm.
And yeah, so in those situations, that's when I felt awkward speaking like that. But it took me to go to Spain that when I went to Salamanca to really kind of solidify, like, okay, no, this is how I speak. This is how
Yeah.
I'm going to speak. And then when I came back, I didn't care. I think that's what it took to be in a situation where other people spoke like that. And but yeah, I know that you speak Portuguese too, and I'm going to connect
Well,
this.
I'm learning Portuguese. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, you're learning Portuguese. So for me, when I'm speaking Spanish, like from Spain, with Colombians, with Venezuelans, with Puerto Ricans, I never feel awkward, right? It's never weird because I don't know. It's not, it's of course different. The accent is different. Some words are different. But with Portuguese, I feel like I always compare it to um yeah, so Brazilian Portuguese is so musical.
Well, yeah,
It's
for
like
me, it's
so
fun. For
musical.
me, it's funky. I find that Spanish, whatever Spanish dialect, maybe except for Caribbean Spanish, as Caribbeans speak a little bit strange, but the other Spanish dialects, very very romantic. I would say very romantic, very sensual, very sexy. That for me, just ever since even before I started learning Spanish, I think you would agree in the United States and
Yeah.
Canada, we'd often say that Spanish is probably the sexiest language, maybe French, Spanish might be like a tie, but in my case, I always thought that Spanish was like the most sensual language. But yeah, when it comes to Brazilian Portuguese, I wouldn't say it's sexy, but it's very funky. Like it's a very funky language, and when they speak, yeah,
Yeah,
I'd
yeah,
agree.
yeah.
It's like it's a musical language, but it's a funky musical language. That's how I describe it.
Yeah. And my girlfriend's actually Brazilian.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah,
Yeah, but I speak Portuguese from Portugal.
yeah. Mhm.
So
Yeah, it's completely different. I've seen some videos and they say that Portuguese from Portugal, in a way, it kind of sounds like Russian. Like they speak in a different way, and because the Brazilian Portuguese, I guess, is a bit more Latin, where like it's syllable timed, where "Olá, como vai?" And then, but Portuguese from Portugal is like stress timed, like a bit more stress timed, like in English or Russian. So yeah, it sounds very different from the Portuguese in Brazil.
exactly, exactly. So for me, but this is where it's so strange for me, especially in the beginning when I was speaking to Brazilians and her family when we go to Brazil. It feels like if they're playing like you know, let's say jazz music or something like that, and then somebody comes in and starts to play rock and roll, it just feels like it doesn't work.
Yeah,
Like I shouldn't be doing this. And when they look at you, I'm like, oh no, I shouldn't be. Maybe I should kind of like neutralize the accent a little bit because so I do, but it's so weird. It's so weird. I still can't get over that, to be honest.
mhm. Actually, that reminds me of something. I don't know if you like sometimes you like music. Like there's music that I really like. And so when I'm listening to it by myself, like, I get into it. I like it. It's like, this is my music. And then you play it for somebody from a different culture to somebody who listens to completely different music. And all of a sudden you feel really awkward where you feel, oh, I like this song, but now I don't, I feel awkward playing the song right now because yeah, this person is different. Yeah, that happens to me all the time where, yeah, for example, like I love cumbia from Colombia. For me, it's some of the just really good music. I like lots of music, but Colombian cumbia is really good. But of course, when I go back home to Canada and I play it at home and my family's home when they're not there, and then all of a sudden I'll be listening to it and they'll come home, and all of a sudden, like before, dancing, getting into it, and then my family comes home and all of a sudden I feel awkward, like,
Oh
oh,
yeah,
gonna change this music to something else because yeah, they're kind of looking at me weird. So yeah, I think it describes what you're describing right now, right? Where with your
exactly,
girlfriend's
exactly.
family, it's like when you're by yourself or speaking with Portuguese people from Portugal, you feel fine, but all of a sudden you're with Brazilians and you feel awkward, like, oh, I should do something about this because they don't seem to enjoy it as much as I do.
Yeah. But that's interesting though with the cumbia. That maybe that's like part of your Spanish identity, your Spanish speaking identity. And so
Yeah.
with your parents, it's like a different side of you that they don't know, right?
Yeah. Well, maybe let's talk about that right now because I'm pretty sure. Yeah, your parents probably don't speak. Well, no, your father he speaks a little bit of Portuguese, but yeah, neither one of them probably speaks Spanish, right? No. So
So my
yeah,
dad speaks a
yeah.
little bit of Spanish
Okay.
because he's a teacher.
Okay.
In our school, we had a lot of Spanish speakers, but it's Portuñol. It's
Yeah, yeah. Spanglish. Yeah. So like, obviously now you spent a lot of time in Spain and you have in a way your Spanish identity. In my case, I guess it's more of a Latin American, but I would definitely gravitate more towards the Colombian. Uh, but do your parents do they sometimes try to understand your Spanish identity? And then when you try to explain to them, they kind of look at you weird. Because it was my mother. My mother, she always says, "Oh, you never talk to me, you never tell me what you're doing." And then sometimes I'll tell her what I'm doing. Like, okay, so I'm learning this dance right now in Colombia. It's December, so they're listening to lots of cumbia music, and she'll kind of look at me like, "Oh, so yeah, I rode my horses yesterday." So she wants to know what's going on in my life, this Colombian Latino side of me. But when I try to explain to her, she's completely lost, and then she'll awkwardly try to change the conversation to something that she understands. Do you have similar experiences with your family when you try to, yeah, tell them what's going on in Spain and what your life is like?
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. That kind of it's like you get you get excited because you're like, oh, they're interested, and
Yeah,
then
exactly.
immediately let down because you're like, oh. But I think that part of that is that they don't know, like my parents don't know much about Spain. I mean, they've come to visit a couple times, and I guess yeah, they don't. If they ask, it. I mean, they try to understand, and of course, like my decision to move to Spain, that's another thing, right? And of course, my mom's for my mom, it's a little bit more difficult to
Yeah,
understand that. But
say with my mom, yeah. Come
yeah,
back home, come back home, come back home.
I just found this job.
Yeah. Or like when I was single, it's like, there's some good girls here in town that you can meet. Like, I don't think so. I lived there for a while, mom. I don't think there's any good girls that I'm interested in town. But yeah, I would agree. Yeah, very difficult with the mother, especially father. Doesn't really care too much, but yeah, mother, very difficult.
But I would say that, I mean, that's not only true, my parents. So just like talking about travel in general with people that don't travel,
Mhm.
going my friends from back home, right? If I
Yeah,
try to talk to them about, different festivals in Spain or whatever, they'll be interested in the beginning, but I don't know. It's tough. It's tough. Some people just they're not that interested, or they're more focused on what they're doing in their life.
yeah,
And you get that kind of glazed look on their eyes when they're
yeah,
listening.
exactly. It's like, yeah. Uh, yeah, in my case, I guess my strategy when people ask about is, yeah, like I give them the bare minimum of details, and if they ask questions, I'll answer them. But I feel more comfortable trying to change the subject, just to, for example, if I'm back in my hometown, just, oh, so how's your family? Just like talk about stuff that they care about, because yeah, I don't know. I'm not disappointed or anything, but yeah, getting that glazed look when you're trying to talk about something that you really care about is, yeah, like I don't really care, but still, it's like, why did we even waste time trying to talk about this when I know you're probably not that interested? So let's just go to a topic that you're interested in. Yeah, I guess I'm good now at pretending that I care about topics which aren't that interesting for me about the hometown, but oh yeah, okay. So a hockey game. There's a hockey game yesterday. Oh, fantastic. Okay, yeah, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Uh,
No,
yeah, same experience. Okay.
same.
Now, I'm curious because you're learning Spanish and you went to Salamanca, right? And So at that point, were you already speaking Spanish, or was that the point where you started speaking Spanish, or it wasn't until like you left Salamanca where you started to really speak the language?
Um, so yeah, so I had a decent, yeah, I spoke when I was able to speak when I arrived in Salamanca. I stayed with like a host, not a host family, just this woman basically
Okay.
that she spoke so fast.
Yeah.
And maybe it was my impression at the time, and now it wouldn't be bad at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, she spoke really fast and didn't really slow down at all for me to understand. So at that point, like I could understand maybe 60% of what was being said to me, and so I had a decent level, and but it was mostly like I had so much input at that point that I could understand a lot, but of course I couldn't express myself as well as I'd like to, right? And that's very common, having that kind of disparity. But it just really motivated me because I was able to talk to people and practice and improve, and so when I came back, it was the only thing I wanted to talk about. And so going back to what we were just saying, nobody wanted to listen. So I just spent I spent my time, I went right, hit the books, studied more, read a lot, watched a lot of things, practiced online, and and yeah. So at that point, I could speak, but still, I'm more. I would say like when I'm learning a language, I really like to do a lot of input first, which is
Well, actually, we can talk about that, but okay. Yeah.
yeah. Let's get into that too. But yes, because I don't know. I mean, of course, you need to accept making mistakes and things like that, and that's hard for people to do, right? And to see that mistakes are good things, and they help you to improve in the end. So, but anyway, I really just focused on. I had my own schedule. I made a weekly schedule of things that I needed to do every single week, and then a daily schedule of things I need to do every single day. So an example might be reading a chapter of a book, reading a paragraph out loud, recording it, doing a gold list. Have you ever
you did the gold list method?
Dude,
okay.
I loved it.
You like it? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
man.
We talk about that too. Okay. Okay. But yeah. Okay. So yeah. What else did you do?
And then I would do like one kind of speaking session online every week. Maybe watch an episode of a series, but I would kind of mix it up and change it so I wouldn't get bored. But just to kind of make sure that I was being consistent and consistent on a daily basis, but also a weekly basis. And then and I had the motivation that I was going to move to Spain in after I graduated. So I just, put the work in.
Now for you, when you went to Salamanca, did you feel like you could speak Spanish? The reason I'm asking this question is because, sometimes, well, I think you're very similar to me. Even though I didn't learn like this with Spanish, is probably if I could go back and learn Spanish again, I would probably do more input. Didn't really get a lot of input. I did the Benny Lewis learn by speaking, and I think there are benefits to it, but at the same time, I feel like there's also some negatives that I think I could have fixed if I would have done more input. But at the same time, I find with a lot of people when they do for example, I teach with a very input heavy method nowadays, and trying to convince Latinos, or even I would say everybody in the world, like they're used to that one way of teaching a language where it's like a lot of grammar, and they think that you got to be speaking all the time. And I try to tell them like input is very important. Like you should be listening and reading from the very beginning, because it's going to help you so much in the future. But of course, the only problem with this is that sometimes you don't know how good you are at the language. Like, so for example, I was learning Brazilian Portuguese, and I was really nervous to go to Brazil because I just thought that my Portuguese was horrible and I wasn't going to understand anything. But with Brazilian Portuguese and Russian right now, I'm doing more input, where it's just like listening, reading, listening, reading, listening, reading. So when I was in Brazil, I was surprised that I was able to understand a lot and I was able to communicate. So in your case, when you went to Salamanca, were you surprised with how well you did, or were you disappointed? Like, were you happy with where you were at? Were you, oh, this is exactly what I thought it was going to be, experiencing real Spanish for the first time? Or did you feel like, yeah, you weren't as good as you thought you were?
Um, so it's, I would say in the group of I did a program with, I think it was called like ISA or something like that. We had a group
Okay.
of maybe 30 students,
Mm-hmm.
and I would say I was one of the more advanced students at
Mm-hmm.
that. And so for me, I felt good that I was one of the more advanced students in the group. But then at the same time, when we went out to restaurants or we're out in public, I did feel like, like nervous and more nervous than I thought I would be, and more, I wasn't understanding as much as I thought I would. Um, Even after having prepared, as much as I did. But in the end, I was still happy with the result, because I kind of accepted. I don't know if you've ever had this experience. If you've ever had this experience when you're like completely immersed in a language for the first time, that your brain just like, after a couple hours, you just want to go to sleep. You're so tired. That's how I was the first week of that experience. Like every night, and this is the worst part, because my host mother wouldn't put food on the table for dinner until like 10:30. And so
Yeah.
I was like, at 8 p.m., I was like, oh no, I just want to go to sleep. I don't, but I was hungry.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So I was happy. I was happy with the experience, and it really motivated me. But yeah, I wasn't as, uh, I wasn't as good as I thought I was, but that was a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think we need those experiences.
So yeah, in
What
a way, it
about,
was a bit of a slap in the face, but like a good slap in the face. Yeah, I always think that for whatever it is in life, it's always good to get a good slap in the face to humble yourself and, put yourself in your place and to figure out where you need to improve. So yeah, it sounds like in your case it was a slap in the face. Yeah, my case, the first time I went to, well, the first time I went to Latin America, like to a Spanish speaking country, was Mexico to meet my ex girlfriend's family. And uh, yeah, I think very similar to your Salamanca experience, where you go, you're surrounded by it. Also, lots of cultural shock. If you watch Mexican telenovelas, you kind of imagine Mexicans are all. I'm Canadian too. Like in the United States, I think uh, you get a bit more experience with real Mexicans, but in Canada there were no like real Mexicans. So I just assumed that all Mexicans were these tall, brunette, light-skinned people, like I guess Salma Hayek type people. And then you go to Mexico City, and I would just say more indigenous than anything I imagined. I was like, oh, this is completely different than what I thought. And so yeah, when I went, I really didn't speak any Spanish. I listened to it and I kind of understood it, but I only said like one sentence. I told the mother one day, "Me puse la chaqueta porque hace mucho frío," and she said, "Like, yeah, he says Spanish. He said a sentence in Spanish." So I would say kind of like with you in Salamanca, maybe a bit of a slap in the face, and yeah, very tired, just listening to Spanish the whole time. Nobody in the family really spoke English, well, except for my ex-girlfriend and her sister. But yeah, very tired. But a good slap in the face. It definitely inspired me and motivated me more to keep on learning Spanish. But I really didn't speak Spanish until actually I broke up with my girlfriend. And I don't know if it's a gringo thing where you break up with somebody, you got like lots of motivation to like prove the world wrong. So I told myself, you gotta learn Spanish just to really prove a point that yes, you can do it. You don't need that woman to learn Spanish. So yeah, it wasn't really until like 2 years after that first trip to Mexico where I really, okay, I'm going to start speaking Spanish. And in my case, I think you started following lots of polyglots. In my case, it was, I saw Benny Lewis video, and yeah, his thing was speak from the very beginning. So I just said, okay, I'm going to speak. And I went to language exchanges online and just started talking as much as I could in Spanish. And yeah, so I realized after a few months, oh, yeah, I can learn Spanish. I can learn Spanish. I can do this. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. So I mean, in the end, you learned, right? I mean, even if you didn't have as much input as you would have liked, the result in the end, you made it, right? So
yeah, exactly. At the same time, I'm not too. I think you did a better job of grinding, studying, and getting that input. Uh, I was gonna ask. It was about in my case because I started learning Spanish and I started speaking it, and then I think similar to you, where you went back to the United States and you said, okay, I'm going to graduate university and I'm going to go to Spain. In my case, when I broke up with my girlfriend and started speaking Spanish, I said, okay, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to save up a whole bunch of money and I'm going to go to Latin America after graduating to put my Spanish to the test and really get fluent at Spanish. So, I get distracted now telling my own stories. What was it gonna? Oh, it was about input. It was about input, not input. It was about speaking the language. By my case, when I went to Latin America, Latinos are really nice. They're kind of famous for being really nice. And like, if any gringos, you've probably seen some of the gringos online where like they're speaking Spanish, but like it's a really thick gringo accent, and you're thinking, like, okay, like I'm happy that you're learning Spanish, but you really got to work on that pronunciation because that is a thick gringo accent. So in my case, I would say compared to my classmates at university, I had a better pronunciation than most of them. But at the same time, it wasn't fantastic. But I didn't realize it at the time. Then I went to Colombia. I lived there for 1 year. But all the Latinos were just like, oh, you speak good Spanish. You speak good Spanish. So I just thought in my head, oh, yeah, that's right. I speak good Spanish. But then I started my social media in 2018, I believe. And people, it's online, so people are free to comment whatever they want. So you start getting trolls and they start saying things like, why do you speak like you're drunk? Are you drunk right now? Have you been drinking before you record the video? Because you probably know, like, well, in the English language, our rhythm, our accent, our pronunciation is a bit more, I guess, drunk, you would say, where you're reducing vowels, you're getting rid of letters. And for us, it's normal, it's part of the language. But obviously, if you transfer that to Spanish, then you get this really thick gringo accent. But I didn't realize that at the time. But then I start my social media and I realized, oh, I have a lot more that I need to improve. So I'm not too sure with Spanish people, are they very similar to Latinos where like when you're speaking Spanish, they don't really give you any feedback. They say, oh, good job, you speak Spanish. Or were they a bit more strict? Because I've heard like with French people, for example, French people are very, very particular about how you speak French. Like when you're in Spain, were people saying, I wouldn't say it like that. I would say it like this. Like you're not speaking the way that we speak. Were they giving you feedback, or was everything you learned kind of done by yourself?
I would say if it's somebody who's very close, like a friend, they might say something, but in general they won't. Unless it's something like really bad, right? Like if you make a real mistake or say something ridiculous. And with accent, yeah, maybe maybe they would say something if you say something a little odd, like the pronunciation, and it depends on where you are, because in Madrid there are a lot of English speakers, so people who live in Madrid might have more exposure to English speakers and it's more normal for them. But if you go to a little village in the mountains, then they're gonna be like, oh, what is this? Like, because they've never heard that before. So it really depends on where you are, but they're helpful too if you ask them questions about like, is this right, or how do I say this? How would you say this? But yeah, but if they're close, they'll joke about it. Yeah, they'll joke about maybe you said this word a little weird, or you said this word that nobody says.
Well, I speak pretty good Spanish, but actually, I think 2 weeks ago, I was walking with my girlfriend, and I said, I want to say apostar, but for whatever reason in my head, I said apestar, which of course anybody watching this knows the difference between apostar and apestar. It's like no, what did I say? te apesto, te apesto. Okay, something like that. She's like, what did you say? Oh, like, no, 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 no. I want to say te apuesto, te apuesto 1,000 pesos. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Those
obviously,
things happen.
if you say something really silly, people will often tell you. But if it's not too silly, they usually won't say anything to you. Uh, let's get a little bit nerdy now, then, because yeah, you talked about the goal list method, and it seems like you had a very, a very interesting schedule for learning Spanish. So, what were some of the different things that you did to learn Spanish after you returned from Salamanca and you really sat down and you created this study schedule for yourself? What are the different things that you did?
Yeah, so I got really nerdy about it.
Yeah.
I really wanted to know the best way or the most efficient way of doing it. And through that, I mean, you kind of learn that, wait a second, everybody is different, and certain people like certain things. And what I already had learned from wrestling was consistency and how consistency pays off. So I knew that, and I knew that I'm good at doing that. So I applied that to language learning, and I just made sure that I was getting as much. I was like, okay, we have 4 skills here, right? So I'm going to speak, I'm going to listen, I'm going to read, and I'm going to write. So I made sure that I did all of those, and made sure that I wasn't boring myself by doing the same thing every week, every month, and switching it up so that I was, today, oh, I don't feel like doing this, but I'll replace it with this thing. Right. So I was just very, very consistent. And just after like 3 weeks, you just feel, when you're studying, when you're really studying, and the same thing happens when you're, just reading, right? After a little while, you just feel more, mental acuity and the words come easier. So the gold list method, it was something that I was, when I first heard about it, I watched the video of, I always forget his name, David, the guy who developed it. Do you know his name?
No, I can't. Wasn't it a long time? Wasn't it a few decades ago? The guy who made the goal list method.
Man, we're getting old. If it was a couple decades ago,
I think the original
possibly.
goal list method. Well, who knows? Maybe like the polyglot who promoted it was somebody else. But I think like the original guy who did it. I just remember I found out about it in 2018, I think. And when I researched it, I just remember this like old photo, like black and white photo of a man. So
Yes.
in my head, I feel like it's a really old method, not like something super modern. But yeah, I think a few polyglots found out about it. That's how I found out about it from them. But well, I'm going to tell you, I guess, my definition or my explanation of the goal list method, and then you've actually done it. And so you can explain it from your own perspective. But from what I remember, I think more or less, yeah, you're reading whatever language you're learning or listening, watching, whatever it is, you find words that you want to learn and you put them basically into a notebook and you have a list of words. Now, yeah, it's been a while since I remember. So you have this list of words, and then don't you like leave it for like a week or a few days, and then you go back to the list, and basically what you try to do is translate, I guess, more or less the words that you're trying to learn and see how many you can translate correctly. Any words that you don't translate or you can't remember, you either make a new list or you just go back to that list, and a few days after, a week after, you try to translate them again. Is that pretty much how it works?
Yeah, basically. It's 2 weeks. Every list you leave for 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I guess he based that on some study about long-term memory and short-term memory, that kind of like that limit, I guess. But and so like generally speaking, in the beginning, I would just do one word, right? One word. And then I was like, oh, wait a second, genders. So gender with the word. Yeah, and then I would figure that. And then I realized that context is much more important. Little sentences, right? In the end, though, it's not about, like any lists, generally speaking, lists don't really help you if you just make lists of things, right? But what this method did for me was really help my consistency. because at some points I was making 2 lists a day, because you can make one list and leave that list for 2 weeks, and then just make another one and leave that list for 2 weeks, right? So you're constantly making new lists until you have to, review them. And so for me, what it did was forced me to get new language, right? So I needed to find new words. I needed to find new ways of expressing myself. So that forced me to read more. It forced me to watch more movies. It forced me to just have more contact with the language. And that's why I think it was so useful for me. And maybe it does help in terms of like kind of remembering vocab and things like that. I don't know, but I have these words just in my head that, words that I shouldn't know, but for some reason they're just there. And so for me, it really helped.
Yeah. Well, I think actually I was watching a video, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, maybe, yeah, I think you might know because you're a bit of a polyglot follower like me. There's a YouTube channel called Days of French and Swedish. Do you know the Days of French and Swedish guy? He's Australian. He's an Australian guy. But yeah, so he makes videos, and one of his recent videos from a few months ago, I watched it yesterday, and he said something. I think it has to do with what you just described, where he gave himself a challenge to learn. He decided to learn Spanish, and he gave himself a challenge of learning the 1,000 most common words in Spanish in one day. Just like a dumb challenge. He wanted to see how many words he could learn. So he used Anki. And at the very end of the video, he said, now, did this really help me learn Spanish? I'm not too sure. But it was an interesting challenge. I do think my Spanish has improved. I would say, though, that if this method was really going to work, and flashcards in general or a goalless method in general is going to work, you have to be giving yourself enough input, because you have to be seeing the language. Because I did like Anki flashcards with Russian a few years ago, but I think my biggest problem was that I wasn't really getting enough Russian input. So I would find these words that I wanted to learn, but I wasn't giving myself enough input to get myself more experience with those words. So I found the Anki flashcards very frustrating, because I just felt like I was learning a word, but I wasn't really able to put it into context. So I guess for somebody watching this, and I think you would agree with it, Dave, from what you described, is if you're going to be doing like the goal list method or Anki flashcards or any type of flashcards, any type of like memorization, I think the key is you have to be giving yourself that input in order for basically what you're learning from the flashcards or whatever it is to really sink into your mind. Because if you're not doing that, you're just going to get frustrated. That was my experience. I was just frustrated because I really wasn't reading enough Russian in order to get that vocabulary in the flashcards to stay in my mind.
Yeah, no, but exactly. And I think it's super important that you're getting it from the input, because you have that experience of finding the word and that experience of connecting that word with meaning, a real situation. So you have that connection with it, and then you have a stronger connection with it when you write it down or when you put it on into a flashcard or whatever. So you can't just use somebody's pre-made flashcards that have no meaning for you, right?
Yeah, I think like another, like maybe it's like a quick tip. I don't know if you do the same thing, but I always tell students, and even with myself, like unfortunately for me right now, I'm kind of I don't like to be a nomad, but I'm a bit more nomadic. So it's really difficult for me to have books. But obviously, like if I have a book, whether it's I'm reading in English a book, or if it's a book where I'm learning Russian, Spanish, or Portuguese, like I write down everything, like anything that comes to my mind, like, oh, okay, circle it, put some notes on the side, because yeah, it helps you really connect with the language if you're in a way explaining it to yourself from your own perspective, because like you can explain English very well to Spanish speakers. I can explain English very well to Spanish speakers, but at the same time, the person who's going to be best able to explain something to you is going to be yourself. So if you put your own little notes on it, like it's gonna help connect things a lot easier than if you're just relying on, like you said, somebody else's flashcards and just relying on their explanations. You always have to try to connect it to your own experiences and to yourself.
Yeah. You mentioned you're more nomadic and you don't really have books around so much, but Do you have a favorite book in Spanish?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, well, I think if your followers are watching and they're from Spain, I don't want to offend them, but I think you're probably similar. You tell me. But for me, I don't want to mix up the different Spanish dialects. And like I think I'm more advanced now that it's not a big issue. But I also tell my students, like, if you're beginning to learn English, don't be like listening to Australian, British, American English because you're just gonna get so confused because you're just gonna be mixing things up. And then when somebody speaks to you and they use, for example, you speak to a British person and they use flat, but you don't know what a flat is, and because you only know apartment because you learned from Americans, yeah, this is gonna be very confusing. And then you're gonna send a message to me or yourself like, Profe, I heard somebody use flat, but I learned that's apartment. Well, that's because they're British, so they're gonna use flat. So it's very
Weirdos.
confusing. So yeah, in my case, I try to avoid Spanish TV shows, Spanish movies, Spanish books from Spain, just because I don't want to start picking up Spanish dichos or jergas from Spaniards because I want my Spanish to try to be as pure as possible, like as Mexican or as Colombian as possible. So my favorite book that I've read so far in the Spanish language, I think actually it's quite a few. Like I would say when it comes to literature, I would say there's more choices than when it comes to Latin American TV shows because the only options you have for Latin American TV shows are telenovelas. And I'm not too sure if you're a cheesy romantic guy, Dave, but if you're a classic gringo man like myself, like I really do not like the super cheesy romantic stuff. So I don't know if you ever heard. Have you ever heard of the telenovela Marimar?
I've really never watched any,
Okay.
to be
So,
honest.
anyways, it's a famous soap opera from Mexico from the 90s. The woman in it is very beautiful and she's very famous. She married like a rich American record label owner. I can't remember. It's like Lovato, something like that. His last name is Vinny Lovato, something like that. Anyways, but it's the cheesiest, most romantic show I've ever watched. So I tried to watch it because of course I wanted to learn more Spanish, but after 18 episodes, I couldn't because every episode she was crying. Like, why did they hurt me? Why did this? Like, oh, like stop crying, woman. Like, Jesus, how can somebody cry this much? So yeah, when it comes to TV shows in Latin America, there's not a lot of choices. Not a lot of choices because most of them are too cheesy to actually watch. But when it comes to literature, there's quite a few good ones. I would say my favorite, maybe two. There's a Chilean author, Isabel Allende, I think her name is. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I've read her books. I like her books. Her books are pretty good. I think the one issue with me, I'm not too sure if you've read lots of Latin American literature, but Latin American literature is this magical realism. And I think as a gringo, the magical part, like gringos were very practical people. We're very like get straight to the point. And with this magical realism, the magical part just the gringo mind is saying, what? Like what? Like I don't get it. Why? What does it have to do with the story? Like just tell me a story. But like the Latino authors are more like mystical, spiritual, and that can be a little bit difficult. But I read Allende's books, some I think two of her books. I can't remember the names exactly, but I enjoy both of them. And the other one I really liked, but again, I don't remember the name off by heart, is Fiesta de la Chiva, something like that. Do you know?
Del Chivo, I think, right?
Del
It's
Chiva,
from.
Del Chiva, yeah, exactly.
I think I might have it actually.
Do you have it behind you? Yeah.
Maybe not. No,
But anyways,
but I
it's
know
about
what you're talking about. Who is that
the
by?
I can't. The author's very famous. It can be like Borges or might be
Yeah,
Borges. But by fame, one of the most. I think he got won a
yeah.
Nobel Prize in literature for his work. But it was about the Trujillo dictatorship in Dominican Republic. So it took me a while to read it, but I did enjoy it. So I think those are probably my two favorite books from Latin America. Uh, Again, maybe you talked about how like you were studying Spanish and the Spanish culture, and then like it felt really amazing then to go to Spain and like connect. I read 100 Years of Solitude, Cien Años de Soledad by Gabo in English first. That was before, I think I read it before I started learning Spanish. I remember reading it and I followed it. It was okay, but I was thinking in my head the entire time. Again, gringo mentality. Like, what the heck? Like, this is just the weirdest story ever. And also read his other book, Love in the Time of Cholera. That one I enjoyed a little bit more. It seemed a little bit more realistic. But even then, the guy waited 60 years in order to be with his one true love. But during that time, he was sleeping with a whole bunch of prostitutes. So as a gringo, you're just thinking, well, if you loved her, then why were you sleeping with prostitutes? Like, again, it just didn't make sense for me. But then, so Gabo's from the costa of Colombia. I moved to Colombia and I live in Cartagena, which is one of the major cities on the coast of Colombia. And you start interacting with the people from Gabo's books, more or less. And then it clicked in my head, oh my God, this is the culture. Like, this is the culture that Gabo was describing in his books. Like, I saw that, like, there's a famous singer from Colombia. I don't know if you know who he is, but his name is Diomedes Diaz. So when I first went to Colombia, I heard all these costeños from Colombia talking about Diomedes. So I was thinking that Colombians were really into Greek philosophy. I was like, Diomedes, isn't he like a famous Greek philosopher? So, but eventually, the girl that I was spending lots of time with at the time, she told me, oh, Diomedes is a famous singer. His name is Diomedes Diaz. And then she told me a bit about his story. And basically, he was the most important singer of vallenato, which is a very popular genre in Colombia. And I guess he had 100 kids with a whole bunch of different women. So I heard that, and then I remembered Gabo's books, and I said, Gabo wasn't lying. Like, there are people who are actually like what he describes in his books. So yeah, the first time I read his books, I didn't understand it at all. But then I went to live with the costeños, the people in his books, and I said, these people are as strange as in the books. Like, yeah, they're literally men who will like sleep with prostitutes, but they'll have like their one true love. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense. As a gringo, it doesn't make sense, but for them, it's normal, I guess. So yeah, I've read a few books from Latin America, and yeah, sometimes they don't make sense until you actually meet the people and you think, oh, okay, yeah, okay, it makes a little bit more sense now.
Yeah, but that kind of goes back to what I said earlier about when you're reading something, it feels like it's just it doesn't feel real. It feels like an experience that you're having in your head, right? And then when you go there and you actually see it, and you're like, oh wow, this is a real thing, even if it was a fiction, right? Mm-hmm. That's a cool experience to actually have,
Yeah, definitely. And the feeling where like it clicks in your head where you go, oh, like this all makes sense now. Yeah, it's a very good feeling when like everything makes sense because you've experienced it. It's like, oh, it all makes sense. And I guess in the same way, it's the same with learning English. I'm not too sure with your students, but like my students that live in Latin America, sometimes it's hard to get them to understand what I'm trying to teach them. Like I talk a lot about differences between cultures, and I try to tell them like gringos are like this. Actually, an example. I don't like voice notes, and I find where I'm from in Canada, my mom doesn't like voice notes. Voice notes isn't really part of the gringo culture, but I'm not sure about Spain, but in Latin America, constantly sending voice notes. And I get a voice note, I just think, oh my God, I gotta listen to it. Okay. And like oftentimes like 3 minutes, but something that could have been explained in like 2 sentences. So again, my gringo mentality is if you can explain something to me in 1 sentence, you don't need to send me a voice note. Like a voice note is only if my mom is in the hospital and it's an emergency and I need to understand what happened. Okay, yeah, send me a voice note, send me a voicemail, send me a detailed description. But if you just need to tell me that tomorrow's our meetup at the bar, we're gonna have to push it back 1 hour. Yeah, just write me a message, say like, okay, hey, I have a compromiso. I gotta work something at work. So yeah, let's meet up 1 hour later. So yeah, so when sometimes I tell students these things, and yeah, kind of like that glazed look on their face again. But the Latinos that live in the United States and Canada, like they understand me, like it's exactly like what you say. It's exactly what you say. So I'm not too sure. Like when you teach Spaniards about, I don't know, Americans or about things about the English language, can it be sometimes like hard to get across to them? Like this is important. Maybe it doesn't seem important to you right now, but if you talk to Americans in the future, or if you go to London in the future, like this will be important. Like this will be something that you will notice.
Yeah, no, cultural cultural differences definitely play a big role in, I mean, learning a language, but yeah, definitely in a lot of conversations that I've had with students. And that I have to say, personally, I've converted, and
You convert
I
to the
do,
voice to the voice.
I have. And now that
Yeah.
I know you hate them, I'll be sending you them.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. That's a good
but
way to drive me crazy. Send me voice notes. Like, oh God, I gotta listen to a voice note. Yeah. Yeah. Drive me crazy more if it's 5 minutes. If it's a 5 minute voice note, it's like, God damn it, I
yeah,
gotta listen to the
yeah,
voice note.
I can understand. I can understand.
Yeah.
But so the problem is when I try to do that, my problem also in Canada, do you use WhatsApp?
No, I didn't know
Nobody.
about WhatsApp until I met Latinos. Yeah. And I think even with maybe it's becoming more popular now because there's so many Latinos in the United States. But from my knowledge, yeah, it's not super common in the United States either.
Yeah, so that's one of my problems. Are when I'm talking to my friends, I have to use like iMessage or something like that I
Yeah.
never use here.
Mhm.
But when I send them voice notes, I notice that like it takes them much longer to get back to me.
The American one, like your American friends.
Yeah, my American friends, because
Yeah,
they
yeah,
just don't
because
want to
exactly.
listen.
My reaction is when I get a voice note, especially if it's like 3 minutes, is I really don't want to listen to this. So I procrastinate. I got a I got a voice message yesterday from somebody, and I had the time to listen to it, but yeah, in my head it's like I don't want to listen to this right now. So I procrastinated like for 5 hours until like before bed, and I said, okay, I gotta listen to this voice note. So I listened to it, and yeah, I got the information that I wanted. But even here, like Latin America, I'm not sure about Spain, but in Latin America, like I made a dinner reservation last week, and like for me, like you don't need to send voice notes for a dinner reservation. But yeah, they they started sending me voice notes, and I said, it's a dinner reservation. Tell me yes, no, and what you need. But no, they send me voice notes, and I was like, okay, I got a voice note. Okay, yeah. So I still haven't fully converted. Like I think maybe slowly I'll convert to the voice note, but until now I'm very gringo, whereas I don't like to get voice notes. I prefer everything written, so it's fast consumption for me at least. Yeah.
No, I can understand that. I can understand that. And it depends on the person too, because I have a friend who leaves 5 minute voice notes, but half of the note the recording will be like
Yeah.
and it's like, dude.
Well,
think
actually, another voice note. I got a voice note last week from a student, and he was trying to explain something to me. It was for my group classes, and he wanted to explain like a situation he was in. But he decided to record the voice note while he was walking and out of breath. So he's walking like, I see nothing. So I'm trying to listen to it. And I sent him a message saying, I think what you're trying to say is that you can't take the first two classes of the month, but you were walking out of breath. So I didn't really understand everything, but I'm guessing that's what you're trying to say. And then he wrote a text message saying, oh, yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say. So yeah, sometimes the voice notes, they seem to record them at whatever moment of the day. They'll be like in the middle of traffic, lots of people honking, and you can't hear anything. They'll record a voice note. Just, I'm not in a rush. Just wait until you get to a quiet spot and record your voice note. Yeah. So there's stuff like that too that drives me a little bit crazy. So yeah.
Yeah, but here it's the same. Here it's the same. People use voice notes for most things. Have you ever been to Spain, by the way?
No, I've never been to Spain. I want to go to Spain. I think I would go to Spain if I had students from Spain. But I like all of my followers are from like Mexico and Colombia. And so like I've experimented in the past, like promoting group classes for like more of a Spanish hour, but I've never, I don't know, just I never really said anything bad about Spanish people, but I feel like in a way, the way you speak Spanish and the way like vocabulary that you use attracts the people that want to learn with you. So like in a way, I wish that I could attract students just because of my methodology. But like for example, I know Chileans have money. Like they're one of the most well-off Latinos, and I know other English teachers that are from Chile that are easily able to get Chilean students. But for me, I can never get any Chilean students. Like it's impossible for me. And all my students are mostly Venezuelan, Colombian, and Mexican. And I learned Spanish in the beginning from Mexicans. And then the language exchanges that I used, I was talking to Colombians and Venezuelans, and then I moved to Colombia. So it just seems like I'm not really even trying, but it seems like you absorb the culture and the vocabulary, and then you use it, and those are the students that you seem to attract. So yeah, I think the biggest reason I haven't been to Spain, even though I would like to, is just because I wouldn't be able to financially support myself, because basically I financially support myself teaching, teaching English to Latinos. But there's very few Spanish people that follow me. Like there's a few. Like I'll get messages sometimes from somebody in Spain, but yeah, most of the time if they're from Spain, they're going to be Latino, like a Venezuelan Colombian living in Spain, and they'll want to learn with me. So yeah, I think the biggest reason I haven't been to Spain, even though I want to, just I think the other reason too is because I'm really interested in history, and I know like the conquistadores, they came from Spain, and I would like to visit like Trujillo and Madrid and there's a few more cities on the Malaga and Sevilla, and just kind of visit touristic spots. I know the cities in Spain are some of the most beautiful in the world. So obviously I love classical architecture. So I want to see that. But yeah, the base thing right now is the group classes, the things that support me, I can only do with Latinos. And in order to teach them, I'd have to teach at like 2 a.m. in Spain. So it's like, I want to visit Spain, but I'm not willing to sacrifice my sleep schedule in order to see Spain. So it's still something on my bucket list. I definitely want to go to Spain, but I still got to figure out a way to grow a bit more as a business, and then go to Spain. So like,
that makes sense. And also what you're saying about, so when somebody hears a foreigner speak their language, if you're speaking in their accent, you feel more of a connection, I think, right? So if you're using Colombian vocabulary or whatever, they're like, oh yeah, that's cool,
like,
right?
That's nice. Yeah, exactly.
So same with me, where most of my followers are Spanish, and then I'll get comments once in a while from somebody from Mexico saying, that's not how you say that.
Oh yeah. Actually, does that drive you crazy a little bit? Because
I think it's funny.
I appreciate feedback. So in your case, I think it's funny if I understand where they're coming from, but sometimes I get an Argentine saying, "Oh, that's not how you say it," and I'll say, "Well, like, I've been to Argentina. Maybe there they don't say it, but my apologies, but I spent most of my time in Colombia. In Colombia, this is what they say." So yeah, I think that I find it more frustrating because you get all these people saying, "Ah, that's not how you say it." Well, it's like, where are you from? Like, if you're not from Colombia or Mexico, then you can't really give me that feedback, because this is the Spanish that I learned. So I wish I could find a funny like you, but for me, it's always like, okay, am I actually saying this wrong? Or is it just dialectically in that country, I'm saying it wrong? Yeah, because I want to improve, but it was like frustrating. You change something and then you realize, oh, I changed it because that's how Chileans say it. But actually in Colombia, I should be saying it like this. I was saying it correctly the first time. So yeah. Actually, it happened a few weeks ago with nowadays I say déjeme saber. And somebody commented to me in the Facebook comments saying, oh, you shouldn't say déjeme saber. That's like Spanglish. Like you're translating English to Spanish. I responded to him and I said, okay, I know that there are Latinos that say this. I know there are. So I did a screenshot of the comment and I put it on Facebook. And I just asked everybody, okay, this guy is saying that déjeme saber is not something that Latinos say. So what's your opinion? And I got people, like Argentine said, no, in Argentina, déjeme saber is okay. People from Colombia, you could use déjeme saber, avísame. Both are fine. Mexicans said, no, it's avísame. No, déjeme saber, no, it's not very good. So I realized in that moment it's just dialectical differences. This is how I speak, déjeme saber. I like it. I'm going to keep on using it. Maybe I'll use avísame sometimes, but I like déjeme saber. And I know that Colombians, they don't mind it. So, okay, I'll keep using déjeme saber.
Yeah, I bet the same thing happens with English, right? Like I would say something that maybe somebody from the UK would say, oh, no, that's not how you say that, right? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Again, but it is frustrating.
That's why I always tell students, like, when you're beginning to learn a language, just focus on one dialect, because it's going to be so frustrating trying to learn different vocabulary from different dialects. So yeah.
And I wanted to say, I did the same thing, right? Like I wanted to say something about that too. That so I focused just on Spanish, literature, Spanish TV shows, everything from Spain. And I think like maybe like a B2 level is a good time to for a
Yeah,
student,
exactly. I
right?
agree. Yeah, B2 level if you want to start like discovering the other Anglo cultures like Australia or the UK. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, you're just gonna frustrate yourself in the beginning. Like I know beginners that try to. They'll ask me questions. Like a beginner will ask me questions like, "Oh, ¿cómo se pronuncia en Gran Bretaña?" And I was like,
Yeah, right.
why would you do that to yourself? Like you're a beginner. Like just focus on one pronunciation, one set of vocabulary, because you're gonna double the amount of time it's gonna take you to learn English if you're trying to learn British English and American English at the same time. It's just gonna frustrate you so much. Like trust me, I know this. I've learned Spanish, and Spanish has like, well, I don't know how many dialects there are, and like even within a country. Like how many dialects are there in Spain?
That's that question is difficult because we have a bunch of different languages, so people will get upset
Yeah,
if you don't mention. So
yeah.
a
There's
lot though.
Catalan. There's was the Basque, and then you have like the different Spanish. I guess the Castellano dialects.
Yeah,
Yes, a lot of dialect.
gallego, bable,
Yeah,
valenciano,
yeah,
andaluz.
yeah. It's frustrating. It's like people ask me like, why don't I teach like a very specific Canadian English? And it's like, well, just learn like a general American English. And yeah, if you really want to learn how Canadians speak on the farm, okay, well, maybe
I'll
when you're
tell you about
advanced,
it.
yeah, like, I'll tell you about it for sure. But like in the beginning, it's not really that important. It's not that important to learn how a Canadian farmer speaks. It is very interesting. It's kind of funny, but it's not very important for your English language journey. Well, actually, well, you've been asking me more questions than me asking you questions. So yeah, you asked me about my favorite book. So it seems like you like to read. So what's your favorite book that you've read in Spanish?
So yeah, like you, I have a lot of favorites, but I would say one I say is my favorite because it really helped me in my Spanish journey.
Okay.
And it was La Sombra del Viento. I think I have it right here.
Okay.
This one.
All
It's
right.
a writer
Oh,
from
actually, no,
Barcelona.
I've read. Actually, I
Read it?
read. I think. Well, he's written many books, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Actually, I want to read more of his books because I read one of his books. Kind of, I think it was a bit of like a mystery thriller. I think he write some mystery thrillers and then sometimes like more historical novels. Like he does a mixture of genres, doesn't he?
Not too much of a mixture though, I
Okay,
would
okay,
say.
all right,
But yeah, but I mean the different he writes, a different style than this too. But I think it's kind of like so he's from Catalonia. I don't know if he's exactly from Barcelona or was because he passed away a couple of years ago.
okay.
And yeah, so this series of books, there are four of them, I think, and they take place in basically Civil War Spain
Mm-hmm.
in Barcelona mostly, but it's a fictional story, so it's like the city itself is a character right in the book but he changes the city a little bit to make it more
I wonder.
mysterious, like a misty.
Yeah. Do you think that's I guess an aspect of I guess Hispanic literature? Because like again with Gabo, he did the same thing. Like he created, I think it's called Macando. I think it's like a fictional village, so it's based on a real village, but they changed the name. And yeah, with Gabo too, like he creates basically the town becomes its own character apart from the people.
I think more so though in South American literature with
Okay,
the
yeah,
with that magical realism and
exactly.
yeah, but it's different. It's different.
Okay.
I just said that because he changes the way Barcelona is, because Barcelona is not like that.
Oh,
And wasn't
like
like that.
the way people are, or like the buildings, or in what aspect?
Like the weather mostly.
Okay,
He made it like a
okay.
very dark, mysterious,
Oh, okay.
like foggy city.
Mhm.
Whereas in Barcelona is
Is it more of
very
a sunny
sunny.
city? Yeah, it's a sunny
Yeah,
city.
right. But it kind of plays into the kind of mystery of the story as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, so basically for me, because he's a very descriptive writer, so many
Okay,
adjectives and things like that I was able to pick up through that. So for me, it's that book. But and I've read a lot of South American literature too.
okay.
Um,
I guess, yeah, do you have a favorite from South America? Any like Latin American literature that you've enjoyed?
yeah. So I have one short story, because there are a lot of short stories, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
because like Borges wrote a lot of them. One of my favorites is from Cortázar. Cortázar.
Oh, actually, I went to an Argentine restaurant last week, and I think didn't he only write one book, but it was like one of the best books from Latin America. Ayuel, is it Ayuela, something like that?
Rayuela.
Yeah, Ayuela, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So because it's like you have to like switch. It's not like a book that you read
In sequence.
in sequence. Yeah. So
Okay.
because Rayuela means like hopscotch.
Okay. Mhm.
And so you kind of skip around. I actually never finished that
Oh,
that
really?
one.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, no, but it was a short story that he wrote called Las Babas del Diablo.
Oh, okay, okay.
And it's my favorite because I spent so much time on it because it's very difficult because it's
Okay.
just so like what's going on here.
I don't know if you have you ever War and Peace by Tolstoy?
No.
Yeah, that took me a few years. Like I started it, then I stopped, then I started again, and there's so I think the basic thing is there's so many characters. Yeah, just like trying to keep up. A little different than Latin American literature, but very similar. Yeah, with Gabo, there's like so many men have the same name. So then
Yeah,
okay,
man.
which Fernando is this? Like this Fernando or this Fernando? Yeah, it's difficult to understand. All
Yeah.
right. Well, so it seems like you do a lot. Well, when you were studying Spanish, it seems like you tried to make sure you're doing writing, reading, listening, and speaking. Maybe talk about the reading because it seems like you do like reading. I find it difficult sometimes to convince students to read. It's at least in Latin America, it's not the most common pastime. Uh, and of course, I'm not going to say in the United States and Canada like everybody is reading, but my mom always told me when I was a kid, if you want, like my mom wasn't much of a reader either, but I guess she just wanted me to be better than her and my father that don't really read, and just said like if you want to be a smart person in the future, you got to read. And for whatever reason, I just enjoyed reading. And I think reading, when it comes to learning languages, I like reading because like there's no pressure. Like when you're listening, for example, there's a pressure where you have to understand it in that moment. Or when you're reading, like if you find a word that you don't understand, you can underline it, keep on reading, finish the chapter or the page. Then afterwards, you can go to Google, you can look it up, understand it. I find it's the the least stressful way of learning a language because yeah, there's like nobody looking at you, there's no pressure, and yeah, it's like you can basically do it whenever. Like when we're speaking, like you need somebody to speak with. So yeah, if you're in Latin America or Spain and you don't have class with you or me that day, for example, or there's no tourists to talk to, there's no gringos to talk to, like the easiest thing to do would be just to read. So from your perspective, uh, how do you see reading as a study tool or as a way to learn languages? Like what place does it have in learning the language from your own perspective?
So like I said earlier, everybody has their own preferences and certain people like doing certain things more than others, right? So for me, I've always loved reading, and of course it's a task and you have to sit down and make the effort of doing it. But for me, it was a big part of my Spanish learning journey. But for people that don't like to read, it's another barrier that you have to get past, right? Because if you already don't like to read and now you have to read in another language that you don't understand, you're not understanding everything, it's difficult, right? But I think what I learned was you need to practice all the skills, right? Every skill, because when it comes down to it, think about learning your native language. You think about how many hours, how many minutes you spent listening and reading and speaking and writing in your native language, right? And then compare that to the language that you're learning. It's whenever I think about that, you feel better about where you are in your language learning journey, right? Because you can't compare yourself to a native speaker, because you didn't have that experience growing up and you don't have those hours. You don't have that time. But anyway, I think reading, writing, speaking, and listening are equally important. And you have to do all of them. One thing about reading that I see a lot of people make like a big mistake that a lot of my students make is trying to understand everything. And that's true with any input, right? But they get frustrated. They say, "Oh, I hate reading because I have to have a dictionary with me. I have to keep looking up every word as I'm going." And the moment that you accept that you will not understand everything, your life is going to be much easier and you're going to enjoy it much more.
I think whether it's with listening or with reading, yeah, you don't have to understand everything. Like as long as you're doing it's gonna help you. Of course, it's always better to read something that's more for your level, something that you understand better. Same with listening. Like it's always better to talk to somebody who is going to be able to moderate their English, not use as much slang, so that you're able to understand them. But yeah, I find people that they think that they should understand everything. It's like, oh, I've been learning English for 6 months, but I don't understand everything that they say. And I say, well, why do you think that you should understand everything that they say? Like, I don't understand everything everybody says in Spanish still, but I've been learning it for 13 years. It's part of the process. And I like what you said. I do the same thing with myself. Like sometimes right now I'm reading the La Conquista de las Incas, de la Inca, in English. But like I'm reading this and I'm looking at some of the vocabulary that's used. Like I understand it, but then I think to myself, even my most advanced students, they would not understand most of what's written here. And they would need years and years and years of practice to get this to this level. So yeah, I agree with you. Like you should never compare yourself to a native speaker, because it's incredible how much input as, I guess, natives of a culture, of a country, or whatever it is, how much we get, like all the TV shows, all the movies, all the conversations with relatives, with parents, with friends. There's so much input that we get that creates the language that we have. And as a language learner, it's even if you spend the rest of your life learning that language, you're still probably never quite get to the level of a native speaker, because they had that 20-year, 25-year, 30-year head start on you, and it's just impossible to reach that.
Yeah. And then like I'm reminded of that when like somebody makes a cultural reference from the 90s, right? Because I wasn't here. Right.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
no way I'm going to know that.
Yeah. So, yeah. It's like, I know cultural things from nowadays. Yeah. Like in Latin America, like I can understand, but yeah, like you go back to the 80s or the 70s or the 60s and I'm just lost. Like who are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. So I agree. And I always say that reading for me is the best way to learn vocabulary, just because you're able to take it slow and you're able to look up the words. I don't know. Do you say the same? Like, because I find like each aspect, the speaking, the listening, the reading, the writing, they kind of work different things. Of course, the reading, you're gonna get better at reading, but always students will ask me, what's the best way to get more vocabulary? I really want to increase my vocabulary. And I always tell them, like, reading, you're gonna, the most efficient way to get vocabulary, the most words per minute, whatever way you want to calculate it, is going to be with reading, because you got this page of words that you can learn from. Like you can watch a TV show, but still you're going to be waiting a little bit. It's not as efficient, and plus you're going to have to pause and write down everything. With a book, you're able to take your time, underline the words, and look them up. So I always tell students that reading is the best way to increase vocabulary, but I'm not too sure if you agree with that or not.
Completely. If they're asking you for the best way, if they're going to only do one thing too, right? Like, I mean, you can't just do one thing, but you have natural spaced repetition, basically, right? Because you have this one word. Oh, what does this word mean? You figure it out eventually. Then the next time it shows up, you're like, oh, I don't remember it. And then the next time it comes, oh, I think I know what that means. And then eventually you get it. I also like to have my students read and listen at the same time, right? Because then you have the visual of the word, you have the sound of it, and especially with English not being a phonetic language, it's really important, because if you're just reading, you're going to guess what that pronunciation is, just as we did when we were young, right? I don't know if, like, when you were a kid, you remember reading out loud in class and being nervous about, oh, what if I say something wrong? It doesn't happen in Spanish, right?
Yeah. As an English speaker, I didn't really realize until I learned Spanish that our language is so messed up in that way, where yeah, you cannot read exactly how it's written. So yeah, it's impressive. Sometimes I think about that. Like, we actually learned how to pronounce all these words. Like, this is, I don't know how the heck we do it. But yeah, I remember being a kid too and just mispronouncing things. But yeah, luckily the parents, the teachers, like, no, 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 that's not how you say it. It's like this. But yeah, it
Sound
took
it
us years.
out.
It took us years to get the hang of, okay, so here this combination of letters is pronounced like this, but here it's pronounced like this. Okay, yeah, I think I got it. Actually, one example I remember, uh, bass and bass. I started getting into music when I was like 12 or 13 years old, but I didn't know that bass was pronounced bass. So I was saying, oh, the bass guitarist. I think somebody finally said to me, you know that's pronounced bass, right? Like bass is the fish. It's like, oh, oh, thanks. Oh, thanks for
I
telling me
think I
that.
probably, I think I thought that too. And, early on, that's a
Yeah.
really common one. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's tons of things that native speakers that we do. Yeah, we go through a similar process as anybody learning English, where you have no idea how things are pronounced.
But,
Talking
but
about, oh, yeah,
mentioning music though,
yeah.
what role does music play in language learning for you? Or do you think that it is a
Well,
good
in
tool?
my case, for me, different cultures have different strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes people hear me, I guess, complain about Latin America and think I hate it. And it's like, no, it's like I'm just saying like there are things that I don't like and there's things that I like. So like, and for me, like one of the main strengths, positives of Latin America is the music and the dancing. And that was one of the things that drew me to Latin America was the dancing. I guess dancing because I remember my mom always complaining that my father didn't dance. Well, you're from the East Coast, but like in the interior of the United States, there's the famous, I think it's called the Texas two step. You know the Texas two step?
I don't know it, like how to do it, but I've
Yeah,
heard of it.
yeah. So, anyways, it's like a classic gringo farm way of dancing. So gringos used to know how to dance. It just we don't know how to dance anymore. But anyways, my grandparents they know how to dance a two step, and my mom knows how to dance a two step. My father is, I guess, a typical cold gringo man. He doesn't really dance that much. So I remember my mom always complaining that my father didn't dance, and then I remember seeing my grandparents dancing the two step. And so for whatever reason, I just wanted to dance, and I knew that the best dancers in the world when it comes to like pair dancing were the Latinos. So that was definitely another reason that I wanted to learn Spanish was because okay, if I'm going to learn the dance, then I should go to Latin America to learn from the professionals. So dancing, and of course, with the dancing comes the music. And I would say, at least with Latin America, I'm not too sure about Spain, but at least with Latin America, the music is incredibly important. So, like, I know how to dance salsa, but one thing that makes it difficult to dance salsa is the Latinos will have different dance steps for certain breaks in the music. So we listen to salsa and they'll be like dum 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 dum. As a gringo, you're still dancing to the regular moves, but the rest of the Latinos they'll know because they've listened to this song like 100 times. They'll know that doom 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 doom. Oh, they can do a little bit of freestyle.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so I'm not too sure about Spain, but at least in Latin America, in a way, music is another. It's like another language, and if you want to interact with the culture and be welcomed even more into the culture, you gotta listen to music to understand it and be able to interact with it. So I wouldn't say that I've learned a lot of vocabulary from music, but the music has helped me connect with the culture a lot more. So I would say music for me is a big cultural connector. And I would tell any gringo that's especially like Colombia, for example, but I would say any Latin American country that definitely try to get a foundation in the music from the country in order to be able to talk with people and interact with people. And when you go out with people, you can say, oh, like this is that singer. And people, oh, you know who it is? And you can start so many conversations knowing about music. So in my personal case, music, not so much for learning vocabulary, but for connecting with Latinos has been incredibly important for me.
Yeah. No, that makes sense because it is a really big cultural thing, especially in Latin America. In Spain, yeah, music. it's not the same, because a lot of music comes from Latin America that people listen to here in Spain.
Yeah,
Of
it's
course, they
interesting. Like
have
there's
like
now
flamenco.
there's like Spanish reggaetoneros. And
That's
I don't think I
starting.
ever really expected reggaeton to go to Spain, but now there's like was it what's it Rosalia's ex-boyfriend? I like his music.
I don't know.
He's from Madrid. He's El Madrileño. Oh, I like his music. Oh, well, afterwards I'll send you. I'm pretty sure you know
Yeah,
who it is. Kind of
probably.
a ugly looking guy, skinny. And he's called Rosalia called him El Madrileño, and now it's his name. But I like his music. But he's like a bit of a urbano artist from Spain. I like his music. But yes, I never really thought I would hear reggaeton from Spanish people from Spain. But
Well, when you
it's
go to
really
any
popular.
bar here, any club here, they're playing that. So,
Mhm.
I mean, it was only a matter of time really before they started making their own. Because I mean, you have traditional Spanish music, right? The rock scene was pretty big in like the 80s, 90s in Spain.
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, for
Yeah,
me either.
like
I mean,
so like right now, what are the most popular genres of music in Spain? So I'm guessing like reggaeton is really popular, but what else is really popular right now in Spain?
to be honest, like reggaeton and pop in English,
Yeah, English
basically.
pop. Okay, yeah.
That's it, right? Like Ed
Electronic, is
Sheeran.
electronic big?
There's a scene. There's a scene,
Okay,
but I wouldn't say it's huge.
okay.
Rap is actually. I was surprised by how popular rap is here, like battle rap, actually.
Well, even in Latin America, like
Yeah,
it seems like Hispanic people take rap really seriously because like I remember battle rap and like street rap from like the 90s, but then it kind of disappeared in the United States, but seems to be thriving in I guess Spain and Latin America. Like I know lots of Latin American rap, and they take it really seriously. Just that street rap, that I guess that Eminem 8 Mile street battle rap, they take it very seriously. It's impressive.
yeah, yeah. And so for me, like, mm, I would say I used it to learn, not to just to have like more exposure, but I would like you, I wouldn't say that I learned vocabulary through it. Really,
Mhm.
it was just more to just oh, what are they saying here, right? Just to really
Yeah,
understand it, and it was just another type of like listening practice.
yeah. Listening practice. It's like I think it's something that you should do, but sometimes people say like, "Can you learn English with music?" And I don't know. I don't really know anybody who's learned a language like through just music. It definitely helps, but for me, I just find it's more of a cultural connector. It makes you feel close to the language. It makes you feel less isolated. I guess in a way, like when you're listening to music, you feel like, oh, like now I'm like the people who speak Spanish. Like that's how I feel like when I listen
Yeah,
to music and from Latin America. It's like, oh, I know that there are people in this country that listen to this music, and like, oh, I feel closer to them because I listen to the music.
yeah. No, I think that's exactly it. I don't know anybody who's learned a language only through music.
Mhm.
Some
Yeah,
people translate songs and things like that, but it's an activity.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's so many like little like even like for like the goalless method or Anki.
Yeah,
Like again, it's like an activity. Like for me, like the main thing you should be doing, especially if you're beginners, like yeah, the reading and listening, and then once you get better, then yeah, you can start implementing more writing and speaking. But yeah, like the music and like the flashcards, those are like just activities. You shouldn't base your entire study day on those things. It's just something extra that you do.
I think that's the most important thing right there, what you just said, because a lot of
Yeah,
people rely on those things.
yeah,
They just try to review.
yeah, yeah. And then yeah, you spend like 4 years, like oh, I haven't learned English, and it's like well, I don't want to be dickhead, but yeah, you're not there's very few people who've learned a language just from flashcards. Like it's not something that anybody's really done. It's just a tool. It's just a tool. It's kind of like with grammar too. Like just like grammar is a tool. Like it helps you, but yeah, if you're going to spend 4 years on grammar, you're probably not going to learn the language. It's not going to
You
happen.
you can get that through reading anyway, right? I
Yeah.
remember I was reading this, and I remember there's one sentence that I just couldn't understand why they said it that way. And I was just sitting in my teacher's because then my first couple of years in Spain, I was an auxiliar, like a language assistant, and I was
Okay.
sitting in the teacher's room. I was like, "Wow, don't understand why they're using the imperfect here. Why aren't they using the conditional?" And like, oh, so I just asked one of the teachers like, oh yeah, it's conditional, but it's just used like that. And that's when I learned that you can use the imperfect that way.
Yeah, actually, I remember, I think I was reading The Count of Monte Cristo in Spanish, and it's from Spanish from Spain. So it's a little bit difficult because lots of vosotros, and I say, oh, vosotros. And then also how they do the imperative in Spain is like corred. They do the D at the end, which for me was very strange to read, but okay, that's how they do it in Spain. But I remember I learned al hablar, that al, which is like in English would be upon, like upon speaking, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And I think maybe I looked it up on the internet, but I just remember seeing it a few times in a book, and I just realized in my head, oh, like, oh, oh, this is how they do it in Spanish. Oh, okay. So yeah, there's many moments like that where you just have a light bulb moment and you realize something. And yeah, for sure, you can teach yourself a lot of grammar just by reading a lot and listening a lot. Like for me, I would say I've been learning Portuguese reading manga right now, which I'm 32 years old, so I don't like to admit that I'm reading manga, but you got pictures. Most of the time, it's not super complicated language. And yeah, I've been learning Portuguese, just reading manga in Portuguese. And of course, I already know Spanish, so it's really easy to kind of understand Portuguese. But still, for example, in Portuguese, I'm not too sure about Portuguese from Portugal, but after the C in Portuguese, it's always going to be the subjunctive. Whereas in the Spanish, if it's like zero conditional, first conditional, it just stays in the present. But with the Portuguese, they change it. But yeah, I didn't learn that from any grammar book. I just noticed, oh, so in Spanish, they don't change it. But in Portuguese, they do change it. But yeah, like I didn't need any grammar book to learn that. Just read it. I just do it.
And the fact that you know where you got that from too shows how powerful context is, right? Because you're like, oh, I learned this in the Count of Monte Cristo, right? You know exactly where it came from. You have that really good connection with it. So
yeah, that's why I wouldn't say I have a great memory, but I got a few things that I remember. You talked a little bit about recording yourself. When it comes to pronunciation, is that something that you relied upon to improve your pronunciation, recording yourself and listening?
Yeah. I was trying to figure out a way to really, at that time when I was doing that, I didn't really have too much of an opportunity to talk to native speakers and get feedback from them. So you've probably used LinkQ before, right?
Yeah. Is it Link? Is it LinkQ or Link? I think it's Link.
I don't even know. I think it's Link. But for some reason I say LinkQ. I don't know. Maybe somebody
I think it's Link. I think it's Link. I interviewed Kaufman and I've watched his videos. So I think it's Link. Yeah.
It's Link. I don't know why I said that. But so earlier on when I like would post recordings of myself there where people would give me feedback. And I would just, I made it part of my reading schedule. So every time I was starting a chapter, I would just read the first paragraph out loud. And sometimes I would have an audio book where I could kind of compare. So I'd listen to it first, then record it, then compare. And I was focusing on, with Spanish, of course, like you said, as English speakers, we like to reduce. So correcting all those kind of reductions of vowels and things like that, and the cadence and the speed and all that. And that really helped me because nobody likes to record themselves. And we record ourselves a lot.
But sometimes people think, oh, you must love listening to yourself. Like, no. The worst part of my job is having to edit a video, like listen to myself speak in Spanish. Like, oh, Kyle, you sound horrible. Jeez. Yeah. So I agree. I hate listening to myself. I don't make videos because I like to look at myself and listen to myself. Not at all.
Yeah. Have you ever gone back and like re-recorded something after hours of editing?
No. I just say whatever. Yeah. For example, right now I'm trying to create Facebook ads. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna figure this out because I have a whole bunch of courses and I want to figure out how to sell them. right? Like this is my business. I got to figure out how to sell them. But so I was making an ad for my courses, and for whatever reason, I don't know if it was for a course for Instagram, but anyways, for whatever reason, I'm editing the video and I listen to myself and I say, instead of atraer, I said atraer. And I listened to it and I said, Kyle, are you serious? You actually said atraer. And so in my head, I thought, okay, do I want to re-record this again? Or am I just gonna actually I was also putting subtitles at the bottom of the video. So I was thinking to myself, okay, do I re-record because I pronounced it wrong? Or do I just say fuck it? I have the subtitles, they'll understand. And I just so most of the time when I hear my mistakes like that, I just go whatever. I don't feel like re-recording, so I'm just gonna leave it as is. If somebody wants to comment, troll me about it, okay, whatever, I'll deal with it. Because I don't know, it's a lot of work recording videos. I don't think, maybe sometimes people don't realize. Sometimes people make requests and they think that you can just do it in like 1 hour. And it's like, no, like you got to record it. You got to set up your equipment, the microphones and everything. And then you got to edit it afterwards. And then you got to write the description. There's a whole bunch of things that you got to do. And it's a pain in the ass. So when I record something, like I'm a bit of a perfectionist, but I'm definitely not a complete perfectionist where it's as long as it's close enough, I'm okay. And well, I think you focus mostly on Instagram. With Instagram, I don't know if you have the same thing where I want to explain things completely, but with Instagram, you have like 1 minute or 90 seconds. So like, I'll explain things as well as I can. And sometimes I might not have an example. And then you get people saying, why you should have given an example. You need to give an example. I was like, I would have loved to have given an example, but I only got 90 seconds. And like, I'm not a native speaker of Spanish, so it's not the easiest thing to do these things spontaneously. Like I do it, like I'm pretty good at it, but still it's, my Spanish isn't super quick. I gotta deal with what I got. So it's difficult. So no, I do not like to re-record even when I make a mistake. It's just like, it's good enough. If somebody has a question or a comment, I'll respond to it, but it's good enough.
Yeah. And then the other thing that goes into the preparation time for short videos is thinking of how to reduce this explanation it takes time. And we're talking about two different things, right? Because the recording that we do for videos, it doesn't matter in the end, really. We might care if we make a mistake, but what I was talking about with the my pronunciation kind of practice where I would read and record out loud, I was doing that on purpose so that I could improve. So so I repeat it a couple times and make sure there was short text so that I can do it a couple times. But I don't know. Did you do anything to practice pronunciation?
No. Well, in the beginning, no, because again, Latinos don't really give you feedback. They just always tell you, oh, you sound fantastic. So for the longest time, I assumed that my pronunciation was already pretty good. Like, well, people have told me that my pronunciation is good. It wasn't until, I started getting the trolls on YouTube that I realized, oh, I'm doing things a little bit wrong here and I should improve them. So I never did anything like you. I do know it works. I do know that recording yourself and listening to yourself, it will help you a lot. So if somebody is listening right now, I would say do like Dave said, record yourself, listen to yourself. It will be very good practice. And you might even want to like put video so you can see your lips, because sometimes you get like for example, I got students. I did a class yesterday of pronunciation, and I had one of my students, like she was speaking with like really tense lips the whole time, like, hello, how are you doing? I'm doing very good. So like sometimes you see yourself and you see like how tense your mouth is. Oh, like you got to relax your mouth. So, but I never really did it. I think the only thing I ever really did for pronunciation, like a challenge, a task. There's a really good a song that I really like from Colombia, and to give myself a challenge, I decided I was going to learn how to rap the song from beginning to end. So I did that. That was interesting, just trying to figure out the pronunciation, how to do it at the same rhythm and speed as the rapper. But besides that, I would just say I did have an accent reduction teacher from Mexico for I think about a year. And maybe it's kind of frustrating. It's really hard to find Spanish teachers that don't just teach grammar.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to find Spanish teachers that know that, yeah, yes, it is easy to learn the Spanish pronunciation system. I completely agree. But at the same time, each dialect has a different rhythm, has a different pronunciation system. And unfortunately, there really aren't any teachers in the Spanish speaking world that teach accent reduction or try to help people pronounce better. So I always tell people that, like, I want to pronounce better, and I do everything I can to pronounce better, but it's difficult because I don't have anybody to give me feedback, because people will tell me, oh, you did it wrong. Like, why did I do it wrong? I need to know why. Like, if I don't know why, it's hard for me to fix it. So I did have a Spanish reduction teacher. She was really good. She was from Mexico, and she helped me a lot. But afterwards, she just stopped giving classes, and I stopped taking the classes. And I think from her, I finally was able to understand things that I was doing wrong, like the reasons why I was speaking like a drunk person. And just listening to myself, I would just notice, okay, here I'm reducing the vowel like a gringo. Okay, I got to make sure that, I don't know, europeo. Like, yeah, European is one of the most difficult words in Spanish for me. Europeo. So my teacher, she taught me that I was saying it like really gringo, like europeo. So I was like, we know, europeo. So yeah, from her, I learned what I was doing wrong. And then afterwards, I just listening to myself, I would notice, okay, I didn't do this quite right. And I don't know about you, but I think once you reach a certain level, you can kind of feel like when your mouth is entering a flow state, I guess you would say. I don't know if you have those flow states when you speak in Spanish where everything is coming out very easily. And so I have moments like that where I feel like my Spanish is good, but then I have other moments where my mouth feels really tight and I know that I'm doing something wrong. And I always tell students this is, when I teach pronunciation, it isn't because I think that Latinos are, well, I guess, well, I don't know too much about Spain, but in Latin America, sometimes they think that gringos are racist because we're asking them to pronounce a little bit differently. I always tell them, one of the main reasons you want to pronounce well is because it's the most efficient system for the language. So like, it's like having an Android, but then trying to use Android apps with the iPhone. Like it doesn't fit. Like, you got to use the right operating system with the correct device, or else, in my case, I'm pretty sure, I think you would describe a few situations like that where your mouth just feels like heavy. And
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're pronouncing like a gringo in Spanish, your mouth will start feeling heavy. You'll get tired after 10 minutes of speaking, and you don't want that. Like me and you are speaking right now, maybe we're mentally tired, bodily tired, but our mouths aren't really that tired. It's just, we're speaking English, we're using our pronunciation system. It's not that big of a deal. But yeah, in Spanish, if you try to pronounce with the same system in Spanish, yeah, it's after 10 minutes, 15 minutes, your mouth is just heavy and you don't want to talk anymore. So yeah, going back to the main point for pronunciation, the main thing I did was, just first, that reduction teacher for 1 year really helped me. And then afterwards, just listen to myself, and I kind of know when I'm doing something wrong. Of course, I would still like to know a few more of the tricks of the trade to speak more Colombian or Mexican, but for the most part, just teaching myself, but nothing crazy like you did. Even though maybe for you, like you didn't do anything crazy. I don't think it's anything crazy either. Just, well, this is like you record yourself and you listen to yourself. It's not that difficult. But who knows? Maybe I'm a little bit lazy. It's just like, I don't really want.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. So I like it kind of go that kind of thing for me. It just made me feel more comfortable with where I was in the learning process, right? So that consistency, and it came from wrestling, and so everything that I do, that's how I approach it. So I know for me it works, and everyone's different. And I remember when I was really focused on the vowels in Spanish, like before I would go into Spanish class, or before I would even here, my first year here, when I wanted to like really make sure I was pronouncing well, I would just go, before I would go out, I'd go, e, o, u, e, o, u, right? Just to kind of get my mind into the vowels of.
Yeah. I remember with my accent reduction teacher, that's one exercise. And I think for if there's a gringo watching this, This is a good exercise to do. There's a few exercises we did that I really like because, yeah, Spanish is a syllable time language. So they go like, well, exaggerating right now, like, hola, ¿cómo estás? So they say every syllable more or less correctly, unlike gringos where we're reducing the vowels. So one thing that she would do is we'd take a text and she would say, okay, I want you to read this text, but syllable by syllable. So I don't think she even knew what syllable time language was. I think she just knew naturally that in Spanish, this is how they pronounce. So I would go like, hoy yo fui a la tienda y cuando regresé yo encontré mi perro en el piso. Yeah, because I knew Spanish vowels were important, but like she really made me focus on you gotta pronounce the vowels like a, e, o, u. Yeah, so like again, if there's a gringo watching this, like wanting advice, people who've learned Spanish, yeah, really focus on those vowels. Like you gotta pronounce the vowels well in Spanish. You can't be being lazy with the vowels, reducing the vowels. You gotta say them a, e, o, u, or else, it just doesn't sound as good.
And then turning around to English, the important differences of like right? Really getting those down. You could do the same thing with English that way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, we have more vowels than English, so I understand Latinos when they complain about the vowels. It's pain in the ass. But yeah, if you learn how to do it from the beginning, it will help you so much. Yeah, because again, you don't want to be pronouncing English like it's Spanish because it doesn't sound very good and nobody's going to understand you. Well, I'm not too sure in your case, but my mother, she doesn't speak any other languages. So for me, my mother is a typical example of a gringa that just only speaks English, like the average gringa. And so in my small town, my mother works with a Mexican lady and she loves the Mexican lady. She's a fantastic lady, a hard worker. But my mom always complains to me, I don't know what she says half the time. And now for me, like me and you, like we know Spanish speakers. So in a way, we kind of like speak another language, which is like Spanglish, where when we listen to a Spanish speaker speaking English, but they don't speak it very well, like we understand everything because as teachers and as learners, like we know the mistakes that they're making. But so I listened to this lady before, and for me, I understood everything that she said. I didn't have any problems. But my mother, I don't know what she says half the time. She's mispronouncing things. She's a fantastic lady, but I wish she would just take some classes or something because I don't understand anything that she says. So I always tell students like pronunciation is important because maybe Dave understands you, maybe I understand you, but that doesn't mean that the 500 million other gringos are going to understand you. They're going to be like my mother. They're going to be saying, or not saying, they're going to be looking at you like, say it again, right?
Yeah. I don't know about if you have this experience, because I do have some students from South America, most from Spain though, and I guess they're higher level, so they don't really do this, but a lot of Spanish from Spain is like, it's like a machine gun. They just they say really fast. Doesn't matter their emotional state. Like they can be chilling, having a coffee, and they're just speaking really fast. And so they have this kind of urge to speak that way when they're speaking English. And so that kind of machine gun cadence in English, we pause a lot, right? It's okay to pause when we're speaking in English, but here people don't like to pause. Even if they're not saying anything, they'll be saying making a noise.
Yeah.
So it's a constant noise coming out of their mouth as they're speaking. Whereas in English, pause and so
actually it's interesting. I don't know if it's difference between Latin American Spanish and Spanish from Spain, but because when I teach my students, I find that when they speak English, I call them pausitas. So they'll do little pausitas, and I always tell them. Now, of course, I agree with you. We make pauses, like so we're talking, and I'm thinking, I'll make a pause. But like if I know exactly what I'm going to say and I'm saying the entire sentence, I think it's a zumbido. We have like a constant zumbido in the back of our throat. It's like, hello, how are you doing? What would you like to do today? say there's not really any pausitas. So I
Oh, I
always
see
tell
what
my
you're saying.
students that. So I always tell my students that is that when you speak in English, and again, maybe in Spain they don't like the pausitas, but with my Latin American students, I find that they like to do these little pausitas when they're speaking English. And I tell them, you want to try to have a constant zumbido the whole time. You don't really want to be doing a little pausita between each words. But I also think it's because, yeah, people learn another language. And if they haven't learned another language, they feel like they need to pronounce each word as a separate unit. And no, like in any language, people connecting it all together. Like I tell students, it's like we're saying one word. It's a sentence, but we're saying one word more or less. So yeah. So yeah, I'm not too sure if it's just the differences between the dialects or if it's just because they're English learners that they do the little pausitas. But yeah, for example, yesterday with one of my students, it was just, you got too many pausitas. You got to get rid of the pausitas. You got to try to connect the words together when you're speaking. You take a pause when there's a comma, for example. You need to take a breath. But besides that,
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Because I think what maybe it is a little bit of a difference because it's like very choppy, right? Like what you're saying is that they're like stopping between words. They're not linking sounds between words, right?
So I'm sure like your Spanish students from Spain, yeah, do like when they speak English, do they do the pausitas? Like I guess more of a robotic speaking, or they do it where
they do
like one word.
They do, but so they wouldn't link it like we would, right? So so I am going to the store.
They do
right? So they're making
so
the which is a very non-English, I mean, at least American or gringo sound, right? Because maybe
we say
Australian. Exactly. So when you, as an English speaker, when you hear that, it's like, what does that sound, right? But so that's the problem more so because they want to make that sound or they want to keep the sound going. But I see what you're saying, that the linking of the words is a problem as well. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
No, but it's interesting. Just different teachers, different experiences. But I see what you're saying. All right. Well, actually, we've been going on for 2.5 hours now. So
yeah, geez.
So I want to keep on talking about teaching and learning languages for now, and then who knows, maybe in the future we'll talk more about your personal life if you want. Because if not, we're going to talk for like 5 hours. Well, maybe let's talk about teaching now. So how long have you been teaching?
So I started teaching. So when I came to Spain, I came with a job already. I had a language assistant job ready for me here, so it was easy, kind of like an easy transition. So I taught at a couple schools my first three years here as a language assistant, and basically, depending on there are many different programs in Spain for this. And everybody has different experiences, but my experience was basically the teacher or the head teacher of the school would kind of give you a schedule, and they would just say, teach, right? They would gave you like a book. They gave me like the book that they're using, maybe like what they were teaching in their class, but it was more for speaking practice. And so I was kind of just like thrown in there to have them practice speaking. And so I did that for the first 3 years, and it was I learned a lot through that. I was lucky because also both of my parents are teachers. So being in the classroom on that side, I substituted for my parents when I was in college sometimes. So it wasn't too bad. And there were kids too. Like since I was young, it was easier to kind of connect with the students. They're like, oh, cool, it's just another kid like us. And so that was good. And so I taught for 3 years, and then I started teaching at an academy, and then I decided to go off on my own and started with italki online.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you started there. So 3 years. It's kind of funny because it's called a teacher's assistant, but it kind of sounds like you were a teacher because you're independent. Because when I think a teacher assistant, I think like you're in the classroom and just kind of on the side.
Like, no, that we were supposed to be. We were supposed to be.
Oh, that's what you're supposed to be doing. But then they said, here's the textbook. Teach a class for us. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically.
Okay. Interesting. And so have you been teaching since those 3 years, just basically on italki, or have you been teaching other places as well?
No. So italki, I don't really use italki anymore. I'm on my
Oh,
own now,
okay.
off any platform. So, um, but yeah, I've just been teaching on my own. I think so. In the beginning, when I was in an academy, the academy would basically set up times for us to go meet up with students at cafes, and it was like classes at cafes all around Madrid. So I was running around, from cafe to cafe, and I got tired of it. So I started kind of doing 50-50 online and in person. And then I just completely went online right
Mhm.
before the pandemic.
Okay, well,
And
perfect. Yeah, perfect time to
yeah,
do it. Yeah. Yeah.
perfect. Yeah. And so then ever since I've just been online.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do do you still do in person? Like people always ask me if I do in person classes, and I think, like you said, it's just well, obviously I'm traveling a little bit, so obviously if they're from Mexico City, but I'm in Colombia, well, I asked them, well, are you planning to fly to Colombia? Like I don't know how I'm going to give you an in person class, but I just find like if I'm in the city and I got it gets the running around. Uh, I always if somebody wants to do it, I tell them, okay, if you really want to do it, like this is the price, but you're gonna have to come close to me. I don't want to be traveling across half the city in order to go teach one English class. It's just I think I don't know if it's the same in Spain, but I find in Latin America people just kind of assume that English teachers are maybe I don't know desperate for money. Where it's like, oh, they love teaching English, so they'll do anything to teach English and make a little bit of money. And for me, it's like no, I kind of like having a stress-free lifestyle and not having to run around, take different buses, take an Uber to go places. So yeah, for me personally, I'm guessing it's the same with you because you've switched to completely online. I prefer online. Just it's more efficient. It's easier for me. It's easier for me, but it's also easier for the student. They don't have to travel anywhere. But I don't know. Some people prefer in-person classes. So yeah, do you still get people that like want in-person classes?
Yeah, every once in a while, but and I did like really enjoy it too because in the end when you give classes to your students, you kind of you become friends. So
Yeah.
it's nice to have especially when I had like the group classes, you have like a nice dynamic, and it's nice to meet up. But again, in the end, if I have to go, if I spend 30 minutes getting there and 30 minutes coming back, that's an hour I lost that I could have been teaching another class, right? Gringos are people too.
Well, I think the other thing too is I'm not too sure about Spain, but I always tell my Latino students is if there's one thing that gringos love more than anything else, it's time. Like time for us is money. And I find with Latin Americans, sometimes they have a hard time understanding that no, I do not want to waste an hour of my life doing that. Like there has to be some sort of incredible benefit for me to waste an hour on a bus or in an Uber to do something. If not, time is money. I'd rather just stay at home and prepare my lessons, my classes for tomorrow or for next week. I don't want to be running around the city. Time is money.
Yeah, exactly, and that goes into punctuality as well, right?
Yeah. Wait, I'm not sure. Yeah, in Spain, are they punctual people? Or are they kind of like Latinos where like 5 p.m. means 7 p.m. for them?
I think they're more punctual.
Yeah.
I don't want to offend anybody, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And
No, no.
and whenever people say that in Spain people are impunctual, people get offended because they're like, "Oh no, but I'm punctual," right? But I would say in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
In general,
Yeah.
people in the United States or the North America are
Yeah.
more punctual. We
Mm-hmm.
have a culture of being more punctual than Spaniards. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Going back to teaching, so you're online now, but you only been on Instagram for 1 year. So, like, when you did the switch to online, were they just students that you had before, like in person, but now you're teaching them online, or how are you getting students if you didn't have social media?
Yeah. So I was the ones online were mostly from italki because I was doing.
Okay.
I started with italki and I got a lot of students from there, and some students from classes that I stopped giving because it was because I was doing less in person classes basically, and then after that when I was 100% online, it was a mix between italki and then people not from italki from my in-person classes. And again, like, so I taught at 3 schools, no, 4 schools in Madrid. And that's, you know, I don't even know how many students in total that is, like over 1,000 students. So sometimes students would contact me after they graduated, and they would want to do classes online too. So
Yeah. Good. Well, yeah. So I saw on your Instagram, what was it? Yeah, last week I put on my page that you're doing these, I guess, yeah, group conversation classes?
yeah, I'm starting them because I really like the group dynamics, and I haven't done
Yeah.
group classes in a while, and I want to start doing that.
Yeah, I know. I like group. I don't know, I prefer teaching group classes more than one-on-one classes. Yeah, I don't want to offend anybody, but yeah, just I find it because it's a lot of pressure. Maybe for people who don't teach, just I find it's a lot of pressure when it's you and a student, and even though the student is paying you, of course, you're not going to have the same points of view. You might not going to have the same interests. So, like for me as a teacher, I'm pretty good at having a conversation with anybody. I think it's one of the things that teachers get really good at. Experienced teachers, they're really good at talking to somebody about anything, even if it's not really interesting to them. But yeah, it's a lot of pressure on the student and on the teacher to try to come up with a topic that both people are able to talk about and have enough basic background about. Like, I can imagine if I went to Spain and I don't know anything about Spanish culture, and then I have a personal class, like it's gonna be hard to have a conversation because I don't know the geography of Spain. I don't know what Spanish people like to do. I don't know anything about the food. But yeah, of course, with Latinos, I can talk about the things that they like. But yeah, it's a lot of pressure, the one-on-one classes, because especially if it's like more than one class. If it's one class, fine. Like you're just getting to know the other person. But if it's like every week and the other person is just having like a regular life, like they go to their work, then they go back home, they have supper, it's pretty hard to find things to talk about sometimes with those people. But with the group class, you got lots of people. Somebody has an interesting story. You can talk about that. There's a lot more interaction. I just find it a lot more interesting. And in a way, I can kind of be a bit more of a performer. And that makes the class easier for the students and for myself. Whereas with a one-on-one student, it's kind of hard to perform. It's like more like we're trying to be friends. And it's kind of hard to be friends with somebody who's a client. It's a little bit different dynamic.
Yeah, it's completely different. The dynamic is completely different. And I've had students for years, like one-on-one, and it just depends on like how you get along, like what your interests are, and what you're interested in talking about. But yeah, I've had the experience too where it's a little bit more difficult to kind of make a connection, and yeah, that's why. And the performance aspect is fun, right? With the group classes, so. Yeah, you're an entertainer at that point, right? So it's fun.
Yeah, for me, yeah. Like I'd complain about things in Canada, United States or Latin America, make it funny. I feel like a comedian. Yeah, I like the performance aspect. I think there's different teachers. Well, I think you said you appreciate my humor. I think you do the similar thing. Like you try to put humor in your classes. My students tell me I have a relaxed atmosphere in my classes, and that's what I try to do. I try to have a relaxed atmosphere. I don't want to be super technical with my teaching of English. For me, I have no structure. My students tell me I have structure in classes, but yeah, I try to have like a mixture between structure and freedom. Wait, talk about that. So when you're teaching English, what is it mostly like just conversation, or do you have a specific methodology that you're using? Is there anything that you use that you would say I don't know, separates you from other teachers, that makes you Profe Guiri?
So. Well, in terms of Profe Guiri, it's the Spanish aspect, right? Knowing and this, we can read their minds, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I said. Like, I've learned your language. Like, I know what you're gonna do wrong. It's like,
exactly.
Why should I learn from you? And it's like, because I know exactly why you're making that mistake. I know how to fix it. Pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar. I can explain everything to you. I can read your mind.
We read their minds, yeah, basically, and you could predict it sometimes. Oh, here it comes, right?
It's like, all right, yes,
I want that. Oh.
Yeah. Sometimes for me, I'm always happy when I'm expecting them to make a mistake and they don't make a mistake as I go.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, good. That's good. That's fantastic. But yeah, I know what you mean. Where you like, okay, this is where the mistake happens. Oh, they did it. Okay, I gotta explain this. I gotta help them out here. Yeah.
Yeah, but since my personality is like I explained with my learning process, I'm a little bit more structured.
Yeah.
I do have for my one-on-one classes, it depends on the student too, based on their learning style. But what I like to have a structure, and I kind of take what I learned from my learning process as well from my, teaching experience, and I put that all together, and I have a structure. There's, and when you were saying earlier, like finding topics to talk about, I always have a set topic. Not actually, so I won't like send the student a specific topic, because I learned that sometimes the topic that I send is not interesting to that student. So I have kind of like a list of topics already ready for them to prepare before the class, and then so they're already kind of primed for the conversation.
Yeah, and then so do you focus on conversation, or is it like sometimes, I don't know, you take a text and you focus on pronunciation, or you take a text and you want to teach vocabulary, or you find a video and you want to explain like more of the street English that gringos are going to use in informal conversations?
Yeah, so I use videos, I use texts. I've used songs in class sometimes too, just to kind of, some things are really interesting to kind of point out. But so all of that really, conversation is a big part of it, and I make them do presentations usually. So if I have a student that is the same kind of learner as I am, kind of more likes the structure, they'll have to show me, I say like between 5 to 8 new words that you learned from this, whatever it is. So let's say it's a text, just kind of like mark them down. You don't even have to look them up if you don't want to. So in the beginning, we'll talk about those words, have them use them in context, whatever. Then I have them present the topic to me. So they'll just, as if I knew nothing, they would teach me about the topic. And then we'll kind of transition to a conversation from there. And then also I have a writing prompt for homework. And so we go there, and we'll do pronunciation practice with that. It depends on the class though, because sometimes we do many different things. Sometimes we get really focused on pronunciation. And I actually do record my students during the class, even if they don't like to sometimes.
But like you send it? Okay.
Yeah, so in the same class, I'll record, stop it, and then we'll watch it together.
You take out your phone and like you record them speaking, and then or is it kind of like this, where Zoom, where like you're recording, then you stop it quickly, you download it, and then you show it to them?
Yeah, so for those, Skype works really well. So you record, and then as soon as you hit stop, it sends it to them.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, message.
Yeah. I've been using Zoom like since 2018. So I think back then Skype was horrible for teaching classes, but I think they've improved a lot, where like recording is easier. It's much easier to teach with Skype. Okay. Well, that's good.
Yeah. And so like really, and we were talking about this earlier, but hearing yourself when you're speaking or when you're reading out loud, you don't hear yourself well, right? You can't hear yourself well when you're speaking. So to be able to kind of step back and say, okay, this is how I sound. And of course, it's not a nice experience to hear yourself, but you need to really see where you're making mistakes. And then, and of course, corrections at the end, basically.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think I'm not asking this question because I don't think you're a good teacher, but my students always ask me like, what are your qualifications to teach English? So in my case, I did the CELTA in Bogota, and then just from there, just getting experience. And like, I don't know, when it comes to, I think, gringos, for us, experience is the best teacher. So I was, in a way, I kind of get offended sometimes when people are like, oh, but like, you don't have a bachelor's in English teaching, or like you don't have a master's or something. I really don't want to take a master's or a doctorate. Like for me, I'm a gringo. The best thing to do is to be in the situation and doing it and trying to improve the methodology. But I'm not too sure in your case, like when you went to Spain, did you take any programs or courses in order to learn how to teach, or was it just getting the experience, experimenting with things and trying to find the best methodology for your students?
Yeah. So I did a TEFL program first, which was a really cool experience actually, because it was like tied to a English immersion camp in Eastern Europe. So like you could go to Poland, you can go to Hungary, you could go and spend a week there in a hotel with people that just want to practice English. So it was a really cool experience. So I did TEFL with that, and then I did CELTA as well here in Madrid.
Okay. Yeah.
And but like you said, I mean, I learned some things from those courses, and CELTA's more. I mean, CELTA's more focused on classes, right? Like with many students, not on one-on-one. Yeah. It's not. I mean, of course, you can learn things about the language itself that will help you. Yeah. But I think in terms of my experience, I learned so much that because I did this right before the pandemic.
Okay.
It was 2018. Mm-hmm. And I already had 4 years of teaching experience, and I already knew a lot before going into it. So there were some things that I learned, some things I already knew, but it was a good experience in the end.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I learned a lot from the CELTA, but I found that over the years I began to develop my own methodology, and then also kind of abandon things. I remember, I'm not sure if you remember this or if they taught the same thing, but one of the things that my instructor taught me was don't do echoing. You know what echoing is?
When you're saying back to the student what they're saying. Yeah.
And who knows, maybe you agree with it. I remember when I first learned it, I thought, okay, if you say it's the best, that's fine. But now I completely disagree with it, because I know, like, in a way, it's a way to give correction without being like, that's wrong, it's this way. So like if my student is talking to me and they say something like, typical mistake, I have 32 years old. I was like, so instead of saying, no, it's not like that. It's, I am 32 years old, right? So instead of doing it like that, I do echoing, where just, okay, so you are 32 years old. Okay. So I don't say like they did it wrong, but like I know as a language learner that many times, like when the brain is ready to know the language, the brain will be like, oh, that's how I'm supposed to say it. So when I took the CELTA, like, I thought, echoing is bad. But nowadays, I think echoing isn't wrong. I think it's a fantastic technique, which isn't a technique. It's just kind of giving students feedback without being like, no, don't do this. It's like this. It's just like letting their brain kind of absorb what I'm saying and realize, that's how I'm supposed to say it.
That's interesting that they told you not to, because it actually, in my course, they told us to do
really?
that.
Yeah. No, yeah. My instructor said, don't do echoing. And the other thing that, I disagreed with her at the time, but I would kind of go on tangents talking about things. So for example, I would do a class and maybe a student says, we're talking about sports. And a student says, what's the most popular sport in Canada? I would say hockey. And, what's hockey? And I explain to them hockey. And then I remember my instructor, after like giving the feedback, I think they do the same thing in the CELTA everywhere, is they would give you feedback after you do the test lesson. And she said, no, stick to the lesson plan. Don't go on any tangents. So like if students ask you a question, just respond quick and then go back to the lesson plan. So like in order to get my CELTA, like I did what she told me, but afterwards I said, like, if my student is interested in knowing something about Canada, and like when I learned Spanish, that was the thing that I enjoyed the most, was when my professors were like, in Mexico, we drink pulque and it's a really sticky alcoholic drink. Like, really? I want to learn more Spanish so that I can go to Mexico City. Like, I'm not going to deny my students that cultural experience because, I don't know, some prudish woman says that, I should stick to the lesson plan. Like I do stick to a lesson plan, but it's like a very flexible lesson plan, and my students will want something. Their brain is ready to learn something. I give it to them because I know that those, that moment is a perfect moment to teach them something. And I know that they want it.
Yeah, you're the captain of the ship as the teacher, and if you see that this way, you're going to be able to take advantage of the situation and teach them something new. I don't think there's any problem with that. Yeah, and going back to what I was saying about my professor, right? He never stick to the lesson plan, right? And I learned, and it motivated me more, and that's part of it too. Creating that connection for them, or helping them connect to the language outside of the classroom.
Yeah, people want to connect with real people, and if the professor acts like a robot instead of a real person, the students are going to have a hard time connecting with the language. So you want to try to show personality, try to connect with the students. You don't want to be a cold person. And you've been teaching for a long time as well. So have you changed a lot as a teacher? Like, is there something that maybe you did in the very beginning that nowadays you've completely changed, and then you would say, yeah, I don't do it that way at all anymore?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think in the beginning, I thought everyone was like me,
Oh yeah, I think that's another thing too. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
right? So just realizing that everybody learns differently
Mhm.
and has different abilities, and are some people might naturally be good at this thing or the other thing, and you need to treat every case kind of like on an individual basis. When I was starting out, like I said, I was kind of dropped into the deep end. I was just like,
Yeah.
these kids are just. So I focused a lot on only speaking activities. And I mean, to be honest, in that situation, it was really good experience for the kids because they were being hammered with grammar and those kind of things. And when they're in the, in their English class. And so to have that nice connection with a native speaker, I think it's a good thing, so that they had that kind of connection with the language outside of just with the real person. But yeah, so I think in the beginning I focused a little bit too much on just speaking and not emphasizing the rest of the input, even though I knew that that was important.
Mhm.
I couldn't really give them homework because they already had homework.
Well,
And
I don't know. My students always tell me I'm so happy that you don't give us homework. And it's like, well, like for me, the best homework a student can do, like come to my classes. The best homework you can do is go home, watch a TV show or a movie or read a book. Like if you want to make me happy as a teacher, I want you to just come to my class, learn. But when you go home, just enjoy yourself with the language. Find a TV show that looks interesting, or a movie, or a book, or YouTube videos. I don't care. So if you want to do homework, yeah, students would be like, I want some homework. Okay, yeah, here's a homework. Go find a TV show you like. Watch it. You're gonna learn. You're gonna learn so much from that. Like my class will give you more of a foundation. We'll make sure you're going in the right direction, but you're gonna learn tons from that TV show that you want to watch. Then
no, I completely agree with that. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like
Because that, for me, that is homework, right? Like you just
yeah,
gotta, I think the word is a dirty word, homework,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
it's just you gotta do things in the language, and most
Mhm.
people don't. They
Mhm.
like I said earlier, the language exists outside of class, and you got to realize that and make sure you put making it part of your life is important.
Well, I'm not because yeah, I think we can talk about this now about input. Uh, as a teacher, I know when a student has learned English without getting input because they speak really heavy Spanglish. Oh, and their accent is really strong. Like I know that they haven't been listening to English or reading English or really interacting with the language. If the Spanglish is strong and the accent is strong, and usually those people like, Profe, what can I do to fix everything that's what's going on here? You got to start listening. You got to start reading because the mistakes you're making are simple mistakes. You're making them because you're translating from Spanish to English directly. And your pronunciation, the main reason it's like that is because you've never listened to how a native speaker actually speaks. Like, yeah, I will help you with pronunciation. I'm going to teach you how gringos we actually pronounce. But again, the thing that's going to help you the most is just you got to start listening to us. You got to start listening to the words we actually use and the pronunciation we actually use. So yeah, so I don't know. It's the same with you, like where you get a student and you say, okay, I know this person probably has never read anything, listened to anything in English.
Yeah. So here in Spain, students Spanish people start learning English at a very early age. And since how the curriculum is in the schools, they focus a lot on grammar. It's little by little getting better, especially now that there are language assistants. But I find a lot of my students are just traumatized by their experience in school with English. So because of that, they never went out and tried to have contact with the language. So the same thing. They have these kind of this Spanglish and very strong accent because they it's like they have a love, not a love hate. It's just like a hate for English. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's say, yeah, probably the same. I hate French, probably mostly because my teachers is I had horrible French classes. So like, I really don't like the language. So yeah, I agree. I understand why they have trauma with English, why they hate it so much.
Yeah. And so because of that, they never try to go out and, but that is a big thing. And also at like, not only at these, this kind of like upper beginner intermediate stage, even at the advanced stage, you can see it sometimes where certain students, it's a skill that, when you get to an advanced level to really see how native speakers react to you, right? And if you say something a little bit weird, you got to be able to see the reaction to know if that's how you say it. And then also, like you said, really listen to what people are saying. Don't just assume this is how we say something. Try to listen as much as possible.
Well, yeah. I understand that there's differences between the cultures. Like, I would say gringos were more informal. I'm not too sure about Spain, but like in Latin America, there's a big distinction between like formal Spanish, which the educated people speak, and like I guess the street Spanish. And at least in my part of Gringolandia, it's speak English. Like there's not really like a distinction between formal and informal. So sometimes I get students where they speak this really formal English, and I think if you speak this English to a gringo, they're going to think two things. They're going to think you're an asshole because like you think you're better than me because you're using fancy words, or they're just going to think, why are they using such fancy language? Like we never talk like that. So like you said, you gotta have that contact with the language so you understand what people actually use. Like one example, gringos, we love to use head, like to head, so dirigirse, but we use it like to say ir, to go. And like I would say all my students, none of them know that gringos are always using head. Like I'm heading to the store, or I'm heading out, or he headed into the room. We're just always using head. And I always have to teach my students this. They don't know that head is the super common word that we use to say go in English. And again, if you're listening to the language, you might be able to pick it up much better than if you're depending on a textbook. Because actually, I've never seen an English textbook teach head, which is strange because it's such a common word that we use all the time. Is head, head in, head out. Exactly where you're heading, and but they never teach it.
That's something I see. I have two students actually that are living 20 minutes away from where I'm from.
Okay,
and they've been living there for, it's a couple actually. It's a cool situation, husband and wife, and they both take classes with me. And
at the same time or different times?
No, different times.
That's interesting.
And to like it really shows because one of them listens to podcasts like sometimes hours a day, like for hours during the day. So he says certain things and I'm like, oh geez, man, that's awesome. Like one example would be how, and this is something I had a problem with in Spanish right when I got here, is we like to say how we like to use the verb for like how we're getting somewhere, right? So we'd say I walked there, or I drove there, or I flew there, right? Whereas in Spanish, they don't do that really. And I said, for when I was working at a school here in Madrid, I remember saying like anduve hasta aquí, and somebody like, what? Has venido andando. Oh, that's how you say it then, right? So it's just a different structure that they use, and my student was using that, and it's always really nice to see that input really working.
Well, actually, I think there's some people on internet who think like input is like the super popular methodology, but in reality, most regular people have no idea about input and how important it is for learning a language. And like as a teacher, I know when a student is getting lots of input because they're using things that native speakers actually use. And I feel exactly the same way as you do. We're like, that's nice. Like, good for you. Like that's fantastic. Exactly. That's how we speak. And I know that natives, gringo natives, if they hear that in Canada, United States, they're going to feel even more connected with you. They're going to be friendlier with you. Obviously not all of them. There's dickheads in every country. So there's always going to be gringo dickheads, Spanish dickheads, Colombian dickheads, wherever you are, but you're going to get a lot better reactions from people if you're if you're able to use that language that people actually use, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah, you talked about input. So when did you, was it like from a polyglot? Was it from taking a workshop? Like where did you learn about input? And when did you, I don't know, start using it on yourself or using it in classes?
I mean, I learned it was really important at a really early stage in my learning. It was probably from, because so many polyglots talk about it and it being so important. And I think just there was a book that I bought probably in like 2012 or something like that. It was a compilation of interviews of polyglots. I forget the name of it. It was a really thick book, and it just had basically it was like basically they would just give their methodology of learning. And so obviously after reading that whole book and seeing, I said to myself, okay, I know everybody learns differently, but I want to see what they have in common, and I'm going to use that. And input was one of those things. And so from a very early stage, I knew input was really important.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so a big inspiration for me, like learning Spanish, was polyglots. I think they were for you too. So like in my case, I think the two biggest ones were Benny Lewis and Idausa Ness. But yeah, so I'm just curious in your case, so who are the polyglots that really gave you that inspiration to learn Spanish?
To learn Spanish specifically, it was just learn. Yeah, there's so many of them, man. There's so many of them.
I saw on your Instagram, I think, I wanted to interview anyways, but I think another thing that made, okay, I got to interview him because I'm curious about this. I think the only tagged picture you have on your Instagram is with Ollie Richards and Daniel Welsh. So I was like, oh, well, I gotta figure out like how he met Ollie and Daniel. So I'm guessing Ollie Richards was one of your inspirations, like learning with stories and learning through reading.
Yeah, no, actually, it's funny because I work with Ollie, and I met him. I would say I knew of him when I started working with him.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, I took things from everybody, all the polyglots. But yeah, definitely him. And the story learning method wasn't really solidified at that time just yet.
Yeah.
So at least like not. The name of the company wasn't that at that time. It was I will teach you language.
Teach you language.
So I started working with him.
So like working like writing the stories or
no. I was doing like customer support. I just wanted to get in.
Okay.
And I still do I do a little bit of that still.
Okay.
And but just because it's really nice to be part of the team because we have like yearly retreats and stuff like that. It's nice. Yeah. But yeah, I started working with him in like 2015. And so being I wanted to get my foot in the door, like get into the polyglot community.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I started working with him then in 2015. And then that picture is actually that was when Ollie came to Madrid and Daniel was living in Madrid at that time.
Yeah.
And I hadn't met him before. I knew of him because of the Chorizo Chronicles, like the blog that he has. And so I met him
I never heard about that blog. Okay, I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah, and yeah, so I met him through Ollie because they were friends.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I know about Daniel. I think I can't remember when I found about Daniel, but I think when I started teaching English, of course, like doing like, I guess, competitor research, I was like, oh, who's this Daniel Welsh guy? And it seemed like he was involved with the polyglot community somehow. So yeah, I saw the picture and there's Ollie and then there was you and then there was Daniel. I was like, oh, it seems like an interesting photo.
So have you ever been to any of the polyglot gatherings or?
No, because most of them are in Europe and yeah, it's well, you know, because you're from the United States, but of course you live there now, but it's a long trip to go to Europe and time difference, plane ticket. You know, sometimes people will say, oh, like Americans never travel. And or Canadians, Americans, whatever. And it's like, I'm pretty sure there's lots of Americans who would like to travel, or Canadians that would like to travel, but it costs a lot. It's not like living in Berlin and you can take a train to like 20 different countries. Like it's a hassle to travel to different countries when you're from the United States. So yeah, most of the polyglot gatherings, they're in Europe. So it costs a lot of money. It's a long trip. There's the jet lag, and like you don't want to stay like just 1 week. You want to stay longer, but you can't really because of work. But I heard that there was one in Mexico, but I wasn't really paying attention to the polyglot community. So I could have went to it, but I didn't realize it happened until I interviewed a European polyglot a few months ago. And he said, "Oh yeah, we were in Mexico." I was like, "What? Oh, did you come?" It's like, "No, I didn't know that there was a." They finally went, because yeah, they always do them in Europe. They never do them like in the Americas. So I was a little
better.
bit, yeah. I was a little bit disappointed. Yeah,
it was in Tokyo. It was not Tokyo. It was in, oh man,
in Mexico,
somewhere in Japan. But I can't remember.
Yeah.
It was in Japan, and then I thought the Mexican one, maybe it was like postponed because of the pandemic. Because I remember them announcing that, and then, but I don't know. But yeah,
well, I know they did. I think it was like right after they opened things up. Well, Mexico was one of the first countries to open up too. So, yeah, I think it happened, I don't know, 10 months ago, something like that. But yeah, there was, I think it was in Puebla or Oaxaca, one of those two places. But yeah, so I never gone to one. I would like to. It seems, I don't know. I don't really like networking, but it seems like a good way to like to meet people and to get your face in front of people. Yeah, so I would like to do it in the future, but for now, I haven't been to one. I guess the only way that I network right now is like doing these interviews, trying to talk to people and see what they can tell me about learning languages and teaching languages. So
yeah, they're interesting. They're fun.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I would like to talk to you more about Spain. Well, got a Brazilian girlfriend, that seems interesting too. Favorite cities, your food, and all that. But we've been talking for 3 hours, so I think for now. Let's call it quits. I still gotta eat breakfast. And, pretty sure in Spain you're gonna have to eat supper eventually. So for now, we're gonna call it quits. Everybody, if you're listening until now, well, congratulations for listening until now. Hopefully, we've been kind of interesting for you. And yeah, hopefully I can talk to Dave in the future more about life in Spain. I don't know, Dave, any information about you? You have your Instagram. What's your Instagram? Is it at El Profe Guiri?
El Profe Guiri, at El Profe Guiri on Instagram, TikTok. I'll be getting on YouTube eventually, but I haven't really started yet, so we'll get there. But yeah, thanks for listening, everybody, and thanks for having me on. It was really really interesting, and we're just getting to know each other. So of course we kind of jumped around a bunch of different topics.
But it's going to be a little bit difficult to edit the video and try to put like timestamps because we jumped around a whole bunch. So I'll do my best. So everybody, I'll leave the information for Dave down below in the description. It sounds like he's doing group classes. So if you're in that Spain time zone, then yeah, definitely check out his group classes. He seems like a great teacher. And I think he also has you have a free pronunciation guide. I haven't put in my email to see what you did, but yeah, if you want the pronunciation guide, it looks like it's a free resource on his Instagram, so get that as well. All right, Dave, so thank you very much. It was a pleasure to meet you, and hopefully we'll talk more in the future. Okay,
thank you. Same to you. We'll talk soon.
Later.